Chapter 194. Chapter 194. Catching a Culprit. The journey back to the capital was much more comfortable when compared to their departure. After teacher Bachi detoxified Zhang Ruan, Xiao Xiao had used flying pigeons to send a letter to the capital. On their way back, Zhang Ruan saw a certain snow pigeon that was a snow-white jade color and looked adorable and quick-witted. It was also very affectionate towards her, and its name was Huba. It was said that Steward Lin had given it this name. Indeed, in a place like the Jining Wangfu where there were more men than women, it was almost an impossibility for it to have been given a more elegant name. By the time they reached the Jining Wangfu, Steward Lin had been waiting for their arrival for a long time. Then upon seeing that Zhang Ruan had returned safe and sound, he was so happy that he burst into tears instantly, and straight away, he wanted to open the ancestral hall to report the good news to the Xiao family ancestors and thank them for their protection. Lu Zhu and the others had stayed behind because at the time Xiao Xiao had to quickly depart, and bringing them along would have caused delays. After Zhang Ruan stepped down from the carriage, all of her servants in attendance surrounded her, asking about her well-being. Lu Zhu smiled and remarked, "It looks like Miss is well now, and since you have survived a catastrophe, there will be blessings in the future. This time Miss has evaded a great danger, so we must have a celebration to wash away the bad luck." Baiji added with much concern, "It would be great if there aren't any residual aftereffects. After all, you have had this poison for many years now. This servant is rest assured seeing that Miss is all better." "Why are you saying such negative things?" Lian Xiao glared at Baiji. "Miss has now returned to us recovered, so let's leave the past in the past. From now on we just have to be more careful, that's all." Tianju lowered her head and there was a hint of self-reproach in her voice when she said, "This subordinate did not protect Furen well, so please punish this subordinate, Furen." The genie guards had always adhered to their responsibilities very seriously. Now that she was Zhang Ruan's personal secret guard, she had actually allowed Zhang Ruan to be poisoned right under her nose. No matter who argued the point, it was still her fault. "What does this have to do with you? It was impossible for anyone to prevent such a thing from happening," Zhang Ruan said. "It's just that the other party is too cunning. You couldn't possibly have prevented my being poisoned more than 10 years ago, right?" Tianju looked at Zhang Ruan in surprise. Zhang Ruan had always been affable and warm on the outside but cold internally. Even though she usually wouldn't make things difficult for her maidservants, it could not be said that she treated her as someone who was particularly close, especially as Tianju had joined them halfway. Furthermore, she definitely wouldn't take the initiative to comfort others who were outsiders. However, Zhang Ruan's words had exonerated Tianju, and when she once again looked into Zhang Ruan's eyes, her usual hostility seemed to have dissipated a little, instead being replaced by a genuine sense of relief and magnanimity. Tianju didn't know what had happened to Zhang Ruan and Xiao Xiao after they went to Mt Jianan, but she felt a subtle difference. Although she could hazard a guess, she still cast a look at Xiao Xiao. Zhang Ruan understood what she was thinking, so she looked at Xiao Xiao as well, and remarked, "Since you have given Tianju to me, then I have the right to deal with her, don't I?" Xiao Xiao nodded, and Zhang Ruan smiled and said, "Well, as I said, it has nothing to do with you, so there is no need to seek punishment." Tianju still glanced at Xiao Xiao cautiously, and seeing that he didn't have any particular reaction, her heart felt a measure of gratefulness. This subordinate thanks foreign and master's leniency and mercy. Qifeng coughed twice. "Third sister-in-law should enter the Wangfu first, or else you might catch a wind chill standing outside. Since you've just recovered from a serious illness, your body is still weak." Everyone immediately agreed, and Lian Xiao and Baiji helped Zhang Ruan into the Wangfu. As Xiao Xiao still had some things to do in the palace, he left after making sure that Zhang Ruan was settled. After he left, Zhang Ruan sat in the room and noted that it was somewhat a mess. Baiji explained with embarrassment, "The servants have been worried about Miss' condition, and did not have the motivation nor inclination to clean the room. I'll take care of it now." "Don't be in a hurry to leave," Zhang Ruan said lightly. "I still have some instructions for all of you." "What is it, miss?" Lu Zhu asked inquiringly. "Although the poison in my body is from an old issue, after all has been said and done, this relapse was caused by someone who poisoned me sometime recently. I know who that person is." Jiang Ruan took the hot tea from Lian Xiao's hand and took a sip. Tianju's expression tightened. Miss, you know who that person is. Although I don't know exactly who it was that actually poisoned me, I do know who was directing from behind the scene, Jiang Ruan said as she smiled slightly. Since they gave me this great gift, how can I not return their kind intentions? The maidservants looked at each other in blank dismay. None of them understood the meaning behind Jiang Ruan's words. After a moment, Lu Zhu asked, is this person the same one who poisoned Miss over 10 years ago? Why did they do this to Miss? If it was Zhang Foran, Lu Zhu wrinkled her face and said, now that Zhang Foran is already dead, how can she order someone to poison Miss? That person is not Xia Yan. Jiang Ruan looked at the tea leaves which floated on the surface of the tea and unhurriedly continued. This person came from my life many years ago and now she is doing it again just because she feels that I'm a threat to her. Of course I'll get back at that person who resides in the palace, as well as for the debt she owes my mother. She sneered and said, Xiao Xiao has already gone to make arrangements and tomorrow morning, I will serve them their comeuppance. Lian Xiao and the others looked at each other. Since Jiang Ruan didn't explain the situation clearly, it could only mean that the person in the shadows must be difficult to deal with, and she had her own ideas about how to deal with them. The maids had been with her for many years, so they naturally understood her thoughts and would not keep asking. Tianju asked, what are your orders, Foran? I have made all the necessary preparations, and since that person is in the palace, I will naturally pay her a visit there. You will follow me into the palace tomorrow. There are some things that I really want to clarify. She smiled lightly, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were so cold that Lian Xiao couldn't help shivering just looking at them. In a corner of the palace, Zhang Dan ruthlessly threw the porcelain bottle in her hand to the ground, causing it to shatter with a crisp sound and crystal shards to be flung everywhere. All the palace maids present were so terror-stricken that they didn't even dare to draw breath. Immediately, one of them knelt down to pick up the fragments, but Zhang Dan angrily ordered, get out. The maids were startled and quickly retreated. Zhang Dan was the only one left in the huge palace and her expression was no longer as delicate and cute as usual, but rather hideous and terrifying. She clenched her fists and gritted her teeth unconsciously. Despite the fact that she had great forbearance, the longer one had been in a place like the palace, and the higher the position one held, the easier it was for one's nature and characteristics to be exposed. Moreover, once a person had begun to forget, or neglect to maintain their facade, it would be very easy for others to spot the weakness that the person wanted to keep hidden. It's just that Zhang Dan was still quite astute at present, so she had the forethought to send the palace maids out before anyone could discover any clues about her true nature. She had always been such a cautious person. Jiang Ruan was not only alive and well, but had also been seen in a horse carriage outside the Jining Wangfu. When this matter reached her ears, Zhang Dan's hands were trembling. Recently, no matter what, no news about Jiang Ruan could be found. The Jining Wangfu was so impenetrable that not even a fly could get out. Moreover, Jiang Ruan had just met with such an accident, and at such a critical juncture, Zhang Dan definitely did not dare to rush headlong into any action which could allow others to gain a hold over her. Originally she thought that hearing no news about Jiang Ruan for such a long time would be good news, but who knew that Jiang Ruan would return to the Jining Wangfu in a carriage in such a swaggering manner? She didn't even know when Jiang Ruan had left. Unexpectedly, Jiang Ruan was so lucky, but Zhang Dan felt more panicked. This matter was originally caused by poisoning, and since Jiang Ruan had fully recovered, she must have discovered that the poison within her body had been there since childhood. Therefore, if she were to investigate further, sooner or later the trail would lead straight to Zhang Dan. With Jiang Ruan's malefic character, one just needed to see the outcome of Xia Yan's family to know that it was impossible to escape from her clutches. Once Jiang Ruan realized that she was involved in this matter, Jiang Ruan would never let her go. Every time she thought about this, Zhang Dan felt a wave of panic in her heart. She could not help but complain inwardly when she thought of the man in gray. In the beginning they had determined that, no matter how brilliant and capable Jiang Ruan was, there was simply no way she could escape their machinations. Yet, who would have expected that their plans were not foolproof? And so, after thinking about it, she walked to the side table, picked up a brush from the jade holder and began to write a letter to someone. At the same time, within the palace, Someone else's mood was completely different from Jiang Dan's. In Nanhuayuan Palace, Xiao Xiao entered the hall and a handsome young man stepped forward, grabbed his sleeve without any manners and demanded, "Is she back?" "She is in the Wangfu," Xiao Xiao said as he calmly pulled his sleeve away. "Is 13th Prince planning to visit my wife?" For a courtier to refer directly to himself in the first person in front of a royal prince, Xiao Xiao was really courageous. However, 13th Prince didn't seem to take offense, and a trace of obvious joy flashed across his face. "Okay, when are we leaving?" For weeks, Xianpei had felt like his days in the palace were like years. What he thought about the most every day was Zhang Ruan's well-being. Even when the emperor came to ask him about his homework, he was distracted and made many mistakes in answering the questions such that even Lu Min could see that he had something on his mind. Of course, naturally Xianpei would not tell outsiders the reason. With his heart laden with worries about Zhang Ruan bedridden with sickness, he had lost a lot of weight. Later, when he had received news from Xiao Xiao saying that Zhang Ruan had been cured of poison, Xianpei finally felt as if a weight in his heart had been lifted. Xiao Xiao hadn't intended on coming back with Zhang Ruan for a long time, which made Xianpei extremely resentful. He scolded Xiao Xiao many times in his heart for being Blackheart and taking Zhang Ruan away, but at long last, Xiao Xiao had eventually brought Zhang Ruan back to the capital. "No one can take a prince away at will. Since His Highness wants to visit my humble house, you can find a way to do so by yourself," Xiao Xiao lightly replied. Xianpei was stunned by such blatant bullying, and immediately became indignant. "You are so unreasonable, you treat me like this, and if I tell her..." "So what?" Xiao Xiao looked at him without any obvious change in his expression, but his eyes were full of pressure. Xianpei was momentarily stunned, and at a loss for words. When he recovered his wits, he felt embarrassed that he lost his composure merely from being pinned down by a stare. Flying into a rage because he felt humiliated, he shouted, "She must make the decision for me." In the palace, Xianpei had always shown a calmness beyond his age. Sometimes it was not an exaggeration to say that he seemed more like an adult than an actual adult. Especially now that the emperor valued him more and more, the servants had never really seen Xianpei display any of his childish side. Now that Xiao Xiao had agitated him until he was hopping mad, it was indeed a rare glimpse of the vitality that should be possessed by someone of his age. "She is my wife, why should she help you?" Xiao Xiao continued. "She's still my..." Xianpei paused abruptly just as he was about to complete this sentence. He raised his head and looked at Xiao Xiao vigilantly, but there seemed to be a slight tremor in his heart. This man was so scheming, with just a few words he had almost gotten him to divulge his secret. Xiao Xiao might appear to be cold and indifferent to everything, but in actual fact he was observant. He knew that by mentioning Zhang Ruan to him, it could cause him to lose his composure. Furthermore, he knew what manner of speech would also unsettle and provoke Xianpei's emotions. That was also why he had spoken those words. Xianpei's heart, which had been provoked to jealousy and a desire for confrontation by Xiao Xiao, gradually calmed down. Looking at Xiao Xiao, he suddenly smiled and said, "Xiao Wangya, what you are doing is really using your strength to bully the weak." His words were heavy with sarcasm, but Xiao Xiao didn't even blink as he said calmly, 13th Highness is not weak." Xianpei swallowed his rebuttal. Who said Xiao Wangya was a cold and indifferent person, who did not concern himself with worldly matters? Once this person turned bad, although he might look genuine, he was in fact cunningly devious. He knew how to jab at a person's sore spots. Taking a deep breath, Xianpei said, "I know what you want to know, but I don't need to tell you. The two of you are husband and wife, but..." Xianpei smiled maliciously. "Now that I think about it, you two aren't truly a real married couple. 13th Highness is too compassionate," Xiao Xiao reminded. "That day will inevitably come." Xianpei was suddenly choked by Xiao Xiao's words again, and gave him a strange look, as if checking whether the person in front of him was the same person as others talked about. After a while he shook his head and said, "No matter what, she and you are not at the point where you talk about everything with one another. What you want to know is a secret, and this secret concerns me and her. If you are really good for her, find a way to let me go out of the palace. I want to see her and I have to clarify some things with her face to face. After that, if she really trusts you, she will naturally tell you." but I have no obligation to tell you. Xiao Xiao looked at him silently, nodded and said, okay. Seeing him agree so readily, Xian Pei breathed a sigh of relief, looked at him solemnly and said, you saved her life before, so I should thank you on her behalf. No matter what happens, you and I share the same goal, and both of us will never hurt her. This was the first time Xian Pei sincerely conceded to Xiao Xiao, or maybe it was because Xiao Xiao had done all he could to rid of Zhang Ruan's poison, and Xian Pei felt grateful from the bottom of his heart. Xiao Xiao glanced at him. Me saving my wife has nothing to do with you, no need to thank me. Xian Pei. Not long after Zhang Ruan settled back into the Jining Wangfu, Zhang Xing rushed over from the barracks after learning about their return, and then he immediately dragged Zhang Ruan off to talk about all the things that needed to be paid attention to while she was still sick. If she didn't know that her elder brother was a martial artist, she would have wondered if he had changed his career to become a doctor. She had not told the General Fu about her poisoning, and had been hiding the news from them, because if Zhao Guang knew that someone had set about to harm his daughter and granddaughter in the past, he would have hastily charged over to the Jiang Fu and demanded restitution and answers. However, now was not the time for this. When Zhang Xing brought up this matter, he had some reservations, but was mostly furious. He said, what's going on? Xiao Xiao didn't tell me who poisoned you, but do you also intend to not tell me about it? Bai Ji brought over some plum blossom honey water, and Zhang Ruan pushed a cup to Zhang Xing. Comforting him, she said, I know who that person is, but I don't want to startle the snake. Dage, don't worry, I will solve this matter tomorrow morning. This matter is not difficult for me, and with Xiao Xiao's help, nothing will happen. Dage also knows what kind of person I am, and there is no way I will let anyone scheme against me without any consequences. Arwan, I'm your elder brother, Zhang Xing said, annoyed. You would rather tell Xiao Xiao than me. Do you feel that Dage is useless so much so that you don't want to tell me about this and let me handle it? Zhang Xing felt a little wronged in his heart. It must be true that when a sister marries, she is no longer one's sister. In the past, Zhang Ruan had been so close to him. He said, when you were young and were bullied by others, it was Dage who helped you out, so why is it that you don't remember it now? Zhang Ruan helplessly pressed her forehead. Dage, what are you talking about? This has nothing to do with me thinking you are useless. I will tell you about this, just not now. Can't you wait one night? Besides, the reason for not letting you meddle in this is because of the position you're in. You are a general and your interference in this matter would cause unnecessary slander and gossip. But Xiao Xiao is different. The genie guards under him are different from the soldiers. They work in secrecy and darkness, making it easier to deploy them. Also, he is my husband and his people are mine. Dage, you don't like him. Is it because you are dissatisfied with me? Zhang Xing was at a loss for words, and replied, how can I be dissatisfied with you? I have worked hard to earn myself a position and status, so that you will not be bullied by others. But after all the effort to earn these things, only to fear what others might say about me to the point that I have to deliberate before I can lend you a hand, what has been the point of climbing higher? Seeing Zhang Ruan looking slightly stupefied, Zhang Xing's heart softened because he was afraid that her overthinking would aggravate and affect her recovering body. He hurriedly reassured, it's all right. We will do whatever you say and I won't meddle. When tomorrow comes, you must ferret out that person for me, and if they dare to harm you, I will destroy them with my own hands. Zhang Ruan smiled. Zhang Xing looked at her and sighed, saying, although I don't know what transpired after you went to Xiao Xiao's sect, you seem a lot more cheerful. I guess it's all thanks to Xiao Xiao. Zhang Ruan was stunned. Why does Dage say that? You are my Mimi, so I know you well. Zhang Xing shook his head. Even after marriage, I have felt that you have had something on your mind. But upon your return, I feel that your temperament has undergone a huge change. I didn't like Xiao Xiao at the beginning, and even thought he was too cold and indifferent, and as such unable to take good care of you. Zhang Xing paused before continuing, however now, it seems that he treats you very well. As I've said, Arwan, you are so good, how can there be anyone in the world who doesn't like you? Xiao Xiao has good judgment, and right now the way you treat him, it's no longer the relationship of an ally which you previously mentioned, right? Was she that obvious? Zhang Ruan paused, then laughed. Dage doesn't like me like this. No, I'm very happy. Jiang Xing smiled slightly. If someone in the world makes you happy, no matter who it is, I will be happy for you. Jiang Xing reached out and touched her head. As long as he treats you well, that's enough. The siblings conversed some more. But Jiang Xing did not want to talk too much longer and prevent Zhang Ruan from resting, so he took his leave a little while later. Before leaving, he gave Lian Xiao and the others a few more detailed instructions, before telling her that he would visit her again tomorrow. After Jiang Xing left, Zhang Ruan rested for a while. As the sky gradually turned dark, after drinking the medicine, Zhang Ruan perused the accounts book in the room. She had not had the time to look through them, so since there was nothing much else she could do, Zhang Ruan decided to take a look. Baiji came over and persuaded, "It's getting late, so it is better for Miss to retire to bed early. You can always look at the accounts later." That's right, Lu Zhu blinked mischievously. Guy is already waiting in the bedroom, while Miss has been in the study. Be careful not to catch a cold, otherwise Guy will give all of us grief. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that since Zhang Ruan's return, there had been a significant change between her and Xiao Xiao. The relationship between the two had improved, and the servants were happy to see it. Hence Lu Zhu put more effort into thinking of different ways to bring the two of them even closer. Lian Xiao flicked Lu Zhu on her forehead. "Little wench, you dare to make fun of Mississippi. It seems that Miss has been treating you too well, making you more and more lawless." She looked at Zhang Ruan with a smile. "But it's true, Mrs. Body can't withstand too much stress, so it's better to rest early so that Guy won't worry." Zhang Ruan watched her maids bantering, and suddenly remembered the scene when she was in a coma after being poisoned. These maids had not been able to meet in her previous life. Unexpectedly, she sighed and said, "How long have you all been with me?" Lian Xiao was taken aback for a moment. No one expected Zhang Ruan to bring this up out of the blue. Lian Xiao and Baiji looked at each other, and Lian Xiao said, "This servant and Baiji have been with Miss since childhood, and it has already been more than 15 years now." Lu Zhu blinked. "This servant followed Miss from the rural residence, so it should be about 6 years. This subordinate has been with Furen for 2 years. Tianzhu said softly. "It's been so many years." Zhang Ruan whispered. "Miss," Baiji said worriedly. Zhang Ruan waved her hand and said with a smile, "I'm just feeling a little nostalgic. You all have been with me for so long, but it seems that your life is not very good. On the surface you look bright when in fact you are surrounded by danger everywhere. When one considers this, it is I, your master, who is at fault." What she said was inexplicable, and Lu Zhu hurriedly said, "Miss must not say it like that. It's a blessing for us servants to follow such a considerate person as Mississippi. Miss treats us servants very well, and we have never felt any regret." Lian Xiao and the others hurriedly followed suit in reply, and Zhang Ruan smiled. "It's nothing. I'll rest first and you all should go to bed early as we have to enter the palace early tomorrow morning." After speaking, she stood up and Tianzhu hurriedly assisted her to put on her coat. Then Zhang Ruan exited the study and entered the bedroom. It was already dark, and the Jining Wangfu fell into silence. There was not a sound to be heard this night, and all seemed to be peaceful. After midnight, light snow began to flutter down continuously. The ground was wet and cold, and one could easily slip and fall should one be somewhat inattentive when walking. On such a dark night, an unremarkable figure suddenly appeared in the courtyard, as if they had gotten up in the middle of the night to go to the washroom, but when they passed the outermost wall, they squatted down as if by accident, and brushed across a specific spot at the foot of the wall. At this moment, suddenly there was light before their eyes, as several torches appeared out of nowhere, dispelling the darkness of the night and illuminating the person. The person was startled and squatted down quickly to cover their face with their hands, while also lowering their head to prevent others from seeing their face. A voice resounded very clearly in the night, "Furen, the person has been apprehended. There really is a thief." Another person said, "Hey, look up. Who is this person?" The person trembled and buried their head lower. In the end, it was like catching a turtle in an urn. Zhang Ruan slowly came out from behind the guards, holding a torch in her hand. The light of the fire illuminated her cold and beautiful face, but there was also a touch of compassion in her eyes. as well an imperceptible disappointment. Wingshungswobi. Lit. To catch a turtle in a jar. Figure to catch something that has no way to escape. Chapter 195. Chapter 195 Hurt. While the guards exchanged looks, Zhang Ruan walked up to the person and stopped in front of them. Zhang Ruan lowered her head to look down at the person and inquired in a low voice, "Bai Ji, you don't dare to look me in the eyes." The guards who were standing to the side were startled. All the subordinates in the Jining Wangfu were familiar with Bai Ji, as she had come with the young foreign as a dowry maid. Aside from Tianju, who was originally Xiao Xiao's, Zhang Ruan's four maids were all well known within the Wangfu. Usually, Bai Ji was the calmest and quietest in temperament amongst the four, and she was also the most charming and beautiful. Many of the guards had come over to deliver things in the hopes of winning her over. Bai Ji had also obtained Zhang Ruan's trust, and had been her oldest companion mate since Zhang Ruan was little. Since the setup to catch a mole had been arranged by Zhang Ruan, when they heard Bai Ji's name the guards were all taken aback. Even though the person on the ground did not respond right away, Zhang Ruan was neither anxious nor impatient. Instead, she calmly and amicably waited. After some time, the person finally tidied up their clothes and slowly stood up, revealing a familiar face. Bai Ji's facial expression was as gentle and composed as usual, as if she had just finished a task for Zhang Ruan. Furthermore, there was no sign of the panic associated with being caught. She simply looked at Zhang Ruan and remarked, "Miss, you're so smart to have apprehended me." When the guards realized that the person was indeed Bai Ji, they were all perplexed and stared at her as though she were someone unfamiliar to them, but nonetheless still wary that she might do something to harm Zhang Ruan. Just then, Lian Xiao and the others who had heard the news dashed over, and were shocked when they saw Bai Ji surrounded by the guards. Being an impatient person, Lu Zhu wasted no time in asking, "Bai Ji Jiejia, how could it be you?" Lian Xiao and Bai Ji had grown up together, and naturally had a strong bond of friendship. When Lian Xiao came upon this scene, even with the shock, the first thing that came to mind was that Bai Ji had been wronged. She asked anxiously, "What exactly is going on? Bai Ji, is this all some big misunderstanding? Miss is here and she will definitely help you clear your name. Speak up quickly." She was really and truly anxious and quickly wanted to help Bai Ji get rid of the accusation because in Lian Xiao's view, Bai Ji had no reason to harm Zhang Ruan, let alone being a mole as reported by the informant. However, Bai Ji did not provide the clarification she had hoped for. She simply smiled and said, "It's not a misunderstanding. I'm the mole that was planted by Miss Side. She is always perceptive and this time is no exception." She did not apprehend the wrong person. She glanced at Lian Xiao before murmuring, "I'm sorry I lied to all of you. How is this even possible?" Lian Xiao, unable to stay calm, grabbed Bai Ji's sleeve. She was agitated, and regardless of the number of people present, she held nothing back. "You and I have cared for Miss since we were children, and everyone could see how well you took care of her. At that time, in the rural residence, you were so devoted to helping Miss deal with others. Thus, after all these years, I am qualified to talk about your character. Bai Ji, are you facing some kind of hidden difficulty? You and I have been friends for many years, and Miss regards you as her own. If you tell her, Miss will definitely help you. Has something happened to you? Something too embarrassing to mention?" Bai Ji paused briefly, before exerting some strength to push Lian Xiao's hand away from her sleeve. "I have nothing to say and I don't have any hidden difficulties. Since you do not trust me, do you not trust Miss? When has she ever captured the wrong person?" Lian Xiao was taken aback by the determination in Bai Ji's eyes. Subconsciously, she took 2 steps back before returning her gaze to the woman in front of her, who now felt very unfamiliar. Bai Ji seemed very different from the friend she spent all her time with. She looked perplexedly at Zhang Ruan, but Zhang Ruan's expression remained unchanged. She only said to the guards around her, "You can withdraw. Leave a few people outside the courtyard." "Young foreign," a guard said with worry, "your safety is important. Why worry about an unarmed woman? It's enough to have Tianju here." Zhang Ruan spoke lightly. Seeing Zhang Ruan's resolve, the guards knew that Zhang Ruan was not a person that could be easily swayed by others, and so they could only fall back and remain outside the courtyard. In the courtyard only Lian Xiao, Lu Zhu, Tianzhu and Zhang Ruan remained, along with Bai Ji whose current thoughts were unknown. Miss treats you very kindly. Why have you done this? Lu Zhu was the first to lose her temper. She was very clear about the things that she liked and disliked in the world. She had always considered Zhang Ruan as family, and sincerely loved and protected her with all her heart. Consequently, when she suddenly realized that Bai Ji was the one who had secretly plotted to harm Zhang Ruan, one could only imagine her rage. If Lu Zhu had previously harbored doubts that Bai Ji had been wronged, after observing Bai Ji's attitude and Zhang Ruan's certainty, Lu Zhu was able to pick up on those telltale signs and was left with only righteous indignation for her. Bai Ji did not respond to Lu Zhu's statement. Instead she looked at Zhang Ruan and asked, "Miss, did you set this trap for me today? Did Miss already know that I was the person who had incited and activated the poison?" "Yes," Zhang Ruan flatly replied. "As I said before, to find the person behind this, it was necessary for me to enter the palace to set up my trap. I intended this for you to hear. I knew you'd definitely try to find a way to send word out, so I specifically ordered the guards to lay in wait within the Wangfu to catch the suspect." "Miss, you are always astute, and nothing can escape your notice." Bai Ji smiled and seemed very composed. "Since when has Miss known that this servant was a mole?" A peculiar emotion flashed in Zhang Ruan's lovely eyes. Her red lips slightly curled, but her smile was cold. "Bai Ji, if it were possible, the last person I would doubt would be you." She seemed indifferent and spoke without any emotion. "My mother gave you to me to be my maid, and you have never left my side. You've been with me for so long and I've always thought that anyone who stays with me through so much wouldn't betray me. Bai Ji, one might say that I only trust very few people in this world, and you can be considered one of them." Bai Ji was astonished. She didn't seem to expect Zhang Ruan to say such things, but although her lips moved in the end, she still remained silent. "All of my food in the Wangfu must pass Steward Lin's inspection. The Wangfu is extremely strict in these matters, and I don't believe any mistakes were made there. Therefore, if the poison was allegedly put in something, it must have been done outside. At first I thought it was in the palace or Jiang Dan had found a way, until I remembered that on the day Xiao Xiao and I were married, while waiting in the bridal chamber, Lu Zhu was afraid I was hungry and gave me a cake. You brought me a cup of tea." Lu Zhu seemed to remember it too. Yes, Bai Ji Jiejie sent a cup of tea because she was worried that Miss would only have cakes and choke on them. Did the tea have a problem? How could Miss determine that this servant was responsible based on a cup of tea alone? Bai Ji smiled. "A cup of tea wouldn't prove anything. Someone else might have put the poison in. But you know I'm not used to eating things that are too sweet. Even though the cakes were already very sweet, you still gave me honey water infused with lotus leaf. Even though it seemed like nothing, Bai Ji, you've been with me for more than 10 years and know my eating habits better than anyone else. You are my first-ranked maid and I could always depend on you. You would not make such a mistake. You only did it because you were nervous and didn't notice the little things." The usual Bai Ji wouldn't serve cakes and tea that was overly sweet. Lian Xiao paused and looked at Bai Ji. She and Bai Ji had served Zhang Ruan for so long that she naturally understood what Zhang Ruan said was correct. Bai Ji had always been meticulous in taking care of Zhang Ruan. She was also cautious and wouldn't have made such a mistake. Bai Ji finally chuckled after quite a long time. "Sure enough, you're very attentive, Mississippi." Surprisingly, such a minor detail betrayed this servant. "Yes," Zhang Ruan sighed, looking her in the eyes. "I also want to know why you're doing this." The upturned gaze of those lovely eyes was fierce, as if to strip away all disguises. There was nowhere for her thoughts to hide from those bright eyes. Bai Ji looked uneasy. She gritted her teeth and kept looking at Zhang Ruan. "Didn't you choose this method to tell me the truth?" Zhang Ruan's soothing voice seemed to tempt and enchant people, so that they could not help but reveal their true feelings. "Bai Ji, why don't you tell me if you have any difficulties? This is an explanation not just to me but to you as well. Having been betrayed by the maidservant who has been with me for more than a decade, you should at least give me an account. Otherwise, I will think I am such a master who can't keep her people." Lu Zhu and Lian Xiao both looked at Bai Ji. They went from being sisters who got along day and night to enemies overnight. This fact was so unacceptable to them that Lian Xiao said, Baiji, you should at least tell us the reason. Baiji lowered her hand for a moment after being watched intently. Her eyes were calm when she looked up again as if she had made a major decision. You guessed correctly, miss, she said. It's not that you can't keep your people. I poisoned you because I am Jiang Foreign's person. How is that possible? Lu Zhu was taken aback. Jiang Foreign passed away long ago. How could she order you to poison miss? Jiang Foreign chose this servant and Lian Xiao to serve miss at the time. But we're not the same. Lian Xiao had a clean background since she was born in the Jiangfu. This servant's family lives in the Jiangfu's rural residence. My elder brother worked for Jiang Foreign's steward. Jiang Foreign summoned this servant to come over and look after miss, but she still held the deed of slavery over my entire family in her hands. Lian Xiao did not anticipate this. She had always assumed that Baiji, like her, had been personally chosen by Zhao Mei to serve Zhang Ruan, and that her background was naturally clean. Who knew Baiji was sent in with an ulterior motive? Even though Jiang Foreign summoned this servant to follow miss, she never told this servant to do anything and only asked for misinformation on occasion. This servant didn't dare to resist. Later, when miss went to the rural residence, this servant's family was fortunate enough to be freed from slavery. This servant kept serving miss because there was no threat, and this servant wanted to serve miss wholeheartedly as a way to atone for the previous years. She paused before laughing. Miss used to be soft-tempered and was frequently bullied. But in the rural residence, miss changed her temper, and this servant was truly happy for her. Later, Jiang Foreign died, and this servant assumed that the matter of the past was forever gone, and that everything would be fine as long as I stayed with miss like this. But then unexpectedly, someone gave me my mother's keepsake. Someone found this servant's family and ordered this servant to give miss medicine, or else this servant's family would lose their lives. So you poisoned miss to keep your family safe? Lian Xiao was taken aback. This was excusable, but as a maid one could never betray her master, so Baiji's actions were unacceptable to Lian Xiao. Even so, did you ever think about miss when you did this? Lian Xiao immediately asked. Let's not talk about what happened before, but you could have told miss what had happened. Miss is so smart. She would have figured out a way to help you. You don't understand. Baiji yelled. Lian Xiao, your family is innocent. You can be a loyal servant. But I am Jiang Foreign's person. If this matter comes to light and implicates me, even if nothing has been done to miss, how can miss see me in the future without estrangement? There's no way I could ever go back to the past. Also, no matter how infinitely resourceful miss is, I won't gamble with my family's lives. I have older and younger brothers. I can't put them in danger for my sake. You are so stubborn. Lian Xiao said angrily. I don't care what you say about me or if you blame me for it. Baiji smiled ruefully. After all, I was the one who committed this terrible crime. However miss punishes me, I have no regrets. So, who is the person who asked you to poison miss? Lu Zhu inquired eagerly. I don't know. Baiji shook her head. They sent me a message on a dart with a note on it. I don't know who that person is. I don't know what they look like because they were on the other side of the wall. I only have one question for you. Zhang Ruan said flatly. Did you know that Zhang Dan poisoned my mother more than 10 years ago? Lu Zhu and Lian Xiao were taken aback. They never knew that Zhang Dan was behind the poisoning because they were unaware of who the person backed by the Xiao family was. So, it turned out to be Zhang Dan. After a moment of silence, Baiji nodded. Zhang Ruan gave her a cold stare. If her attitude towards Baiji had previously been gentle and showed no anger at being betrayed, she was now so indifferent that people felt cold. You've been with me for so long. As you said, you have done nothing to harm me. You and Lian Xiao were by my side during my most difficult moments. Although I've never explicitly stated it, so long as there is peace in the world, I will do everything in my power to protect you. Baiji, I will not pursue the matter of poisoning me. You did these things for the sake of your family. I might not have acted any better than you, but you witnessed Zhang Dan poison my mother, and you could have taken the initiative to remind me like today. But you said nothing. Even though everyone serves his own master and anything is forgivable, I will never forgive you for that. Baiji was taken aback and looked up at Zhang Ruan abruptly. Jiang Ruan had always had a cold temperament and didn't care much about anything on the surface, so she was always very tolerant of her subordinates' mistakes. However, only those close to her were aware that she was insanely paranoid about certain things. Before, Baiji was certain that Jiang Ruan would be disappointed with her, but she would not take her rage out on her. And yet, Jiang Ruan's words just now had made it clear that they were in opposing camps. I have nothing to say about you poisoning me. However, I'll never forgive you for standing there watching my mother die and still doing nothing. Baiji, the bond of friendship we shared as master and servant has ended forever in this world. Every word she spoke was powerful and resolute. Jiang Ruan's words were indisputable. Lian Xiao, Lu Zhu and Tianzhu stood in silence. Nobody spoke. Baiji was stupefied. One by one snowflakes fell on her. Flames burned silently in the snow, and she felt very lonely, as if the entire universe had abandoned her. A moment later, she began laughing softly. Then her laughter grew louder and louder until she was nearly in tears. I did not complete the given task, and they will not spare me for fear that I will implicate them. There's only one way out. As soon as she finished speaking, she slammed head first into the stone wall. She was already close to the wall, and Tianzhu was guarding Jiang Ruan, so it was too late to save her. Baiji exerted her full effort, as she was clearly determined to die. A soft thud was heard. Lian Xiao exclaimed as Baiji fell down softly, the blood on her forehead a horrifying sight. She took a big breath. Blood poured from her mouth, and the snow under her body turned bright red. She gasped, her voice sounding like a broken bellow. One could barely make out the words, "I'm sorry." The snow resumed its quiet fall. There was no sound, and large flakes of snow continued to fall, almost immediately covering up the blood that had stained the ground. Jiang Ruan's voice was so soft that it was nearly inaudible. Please bury her. She turned around and walked out of the courtyard, her crimson skirt and the blood on the ground merging into one. She walked with a cold face and a straight back. She never looked back at the figure on the ground, but she walked faster and faster, hurrying through the snow. When she ran out of the courtyard, she stopped suddenly, holding on to the red column next to her, and felt cold all over. She pressed her lips together tightly, the corners of her lips stiff, but her eyes were slightly red. A lone figure emerged from behind and stood there. Then he slowly drew her over to his shoulder and hugged her in his arms. The young man was handsome, but his slender figure seemed to contain reassurance and infinite strength. Even on this cold winter day there was some warmth. "Xiao Xiao, I'm sad." A weariness that was not normally present in Jiang Ruan's voice could be heard. She reached out and hugged the man in front of her, burying her head on his shoulder. "Don't betray me." Chapter 196. Chapter 196. Mother and Child. Xiao Xiao looked down at the woman in his arms. Even though he remained outside the courtyard, he was well aware of what was happening inside. Moreover, he knew Jiang Ruan, who was normally indifferent and seemed unconcerned, wasn't used to expressing her emotions. These maids had been with her from the start and had grown up with her. They were the friends and confidants with whom she placed the utmost trust. However, in the end she discovered that lies were hidden under the guise of loyalty. Thus, as one who couldn't tolerate mistakes and violations, her sadness was palpable. He didn't speak but just patted Jiang Ruan on the back. In such a generous and gentle embrace, Jiang Ruan's mood gradually calmed down. In fact, Baiji was the last person she would ever doubt, because among the people in this life, Baiji was the only one who accompanied her to the end in the previous one. However, now it had been revealed that Baiji was Xia Yan's person from the very beginning. And although Xia Yan didn't make her do anything, her position, in and of itself, had been hostile towards her since the very beginning. And to add salt to the wound in her past life, she had handed Pear to Baiji with the hope that Baiji would take Pear and escape, but in the end Pear still fell into Li Dong's hands. Maybe it was Baiji who gave Pear to Jiang Susu, or maybe it was because she really didn't escape at all. But whatever the situation was, only Baiji from the previous life could answer. Even so, this matter stuck in her throat like a thorn the more she thought about it, and she would always be suspicious about whether it was Baiji who had personally sent Pear to a dead end. She was a paranoid person. Once she had this conjecture, she would never be able to let go of Baiji. After all, there were so many unexpected twists and turns in the world. How could one foresee them? She gently pulled out of Xiao Xiao's embrace after realizing that she had lost her composure. At this, Xiao Xiao remarked, "Tomorrow, you can enter the palace and go to Xian Pei's place to have a look." Zhang Ruan was startled, and for a moment almost thought that Xiao Xiao already knew the crux of the matter. She asked tentatively, "Why?" "He seems to have something to say to you." Xiao Xiao pursed his lips. "You probably haven't entered the palace for a long time." It was true that his words were intended to divert Zhang Ruan's attention and lighten her mood, but she was still surprised. What could Xian Pei want to say to her? In this life, the two of them had almost nothing to do with one another. But what Xiao Xiao meant was that Xian Pei took the initiative to find him. The conjecture that floated up in her mind earlier appeared again, and even though Zhang Ruan had held herself back from thinking that far, nonetheless she still thought about it unconsciously. "Don't worry." Xiao Xiao seemed to sense her uneasiness and said soothingly, "You will know what it is when you go, and in any case I am always here to protect you." In a straightforward manner, he had made his standpoint clear. He would always stand by her side. Zhang Ruan looked up. The young man's face was cold and beautiful, but the words he said had convincing power, as if as long as it came out of his mouth, it would definitely be attainable. She smiled slightly, while temporarily suppressing the uneasiness in her heart, and only said, "Okay." It snowed all night, and when everyone got up the next day, fresh snow covered the ground. The traces of the thrilling event from the previous night had completely disappeared, and everything was as calm as if nothing had happened. Not far from the Jinying Wangfu, a newly built tomb seemed to have been erected overnight. It was not grand, but it wasn't rough either, and seemed to exhibit meticulous effort in all respects. There was a stone tablet but nothing was written, and it was unknown who placed it there. Two young women squatted in front of the grave, with an iron basin in front of them full of burning paper money. A few sticks of incense were lit in the incense burner. China, traditional religion, customs, Zhongyuan Purdue. Chinese ghost festival, burning paper money. Jiqian. Ritual money made of paper burnt for the gods or the dead. Joss paper, also known as incense papers, are papercrafts or sheets of paper made into burnt offerings common in Chinese ancestral worship, such as the veneration of the deceased family members and relatives on holidays and special occasions, to ensure that the spirit of the deceased has sufficient means in the afterlife. Lian Xiao choked up slightly while burning the money and said, "Bai Ji, we were like sisters in this life, and I sincerely hope that when you are born again you are not a slave in the next life. It is as you said, it is good to be a young lady from a peasant family too, so that in the end your destiny is always in your own hands." Although Lu Zhu was angry with Bai Ji for poisoning Zhang Ruan, the tragic situation last night made her feel sad. She was a soft-hearted person, and since she had been with Zhang Ruan and Bai Ji for so many years, she knew Bai Ji had a gentle temperament and had always taken care of her like an elder sister. As she thought about this, the rims of Lu Zhu's eyes turned a little red. In a choked-up voice she said, "Bai Ji Jiejie, if there is an afterlife, when we meet again I hope to be lucky enough to be your sister." Both of them felt a little bit of compassion, and after finally burning the paper money in the iron basin, the two who had always been out of temper still felt a little somber. Zhang Ruan didn't come to offer condolences, and in terms of their current relationship, between a master and servant, it was truly absurd that they no longer knew how or with what appearance to face each other after her death. Back in the Jinying Wangfu, Jin Er saw Lu Zhu's gloomy expression, and for the first time, he didn't deliberately tease her, but stood behind her for a long time before reaching out and handing her a handkerchief. "Hey, when you cry it's so ugly." However, Lu Zhu didn't have the heart to argue with him, so she lowered her head and didn't take his handkerchief. When Jin Er saw this, the veteran who was an old hand at dealing with the fairer sex was a little at a loss. He hesitated and then approached, standing in front of her with his handkerchief tightly clenched in his hand. Then Lu Zhu looked up in astonishment as he wiped the tears off her face with it. Finally he said somewhat unnaturally, "How can there be people endlessly crying in the Wangfu? It's really a hindrance." Lu Zhu stood somewhat rigidly, as if she was enduring something. Thus Jin Er's hands couldn't help but stiffen, and he looked at her with some worry. But he finally couldn't help but soften his voice for the first time to ask, "What's wrong with you?" As soon as the words were spoken, Lu Zhu couldn't hold back any longer, and she grabbed his lapel before burying her face in his chest and bursting into tears. Jin Er's body was a little stiff, and he looked down at Lu Zhu, who was clutching his clothes in bewilderment. Lu Zhu had always been a girl who loved to laugh in the Wangfu, and her smile was very contagious, as if all life's affairs were no big deal to her. This was the first time he had seen her this sad. Jin Er felt his heart ache seeing her crying like this, and he finally mustered up the courage to reach out and pull her into his arms, and comforted her in a low voice. Zhang Ruan wasn't aware of Lu Zhu and Jin Er's affairs because after Lian Xiao returned, she had brought Lian Xiao and Tianzhu with her into the imperial palace. After being poisoned, she had not entered the palace again. She owed Empress Dowager Ida an explanation, so she took this opportunity to enter the palace today. Zhang Ruan first went to Xianing Palace to meet the Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager Ida felt a little strange that she hadn't seen Zhang Ruan for a long time. Zhang Ruan only said that she had come down with a cold and had been recuperating in the Wangfu. Only then did Empress Dowager Ida feel relieved, and talked with her for a while about whether the relationship between Xiao Xiao and herself was still harmonious, and Zhang Ruan answered her questions patiently. Empress Dowager Ida was very satisfied to hear about the peaceful relationship between her and Xiao Xiao, and probably because she was also happy that she had made this golden and jade marriage happen. Then she asked Zhang Ruan to stay for lunch because now that Zhang Ruan was married and had become Jinying Wangfei, naturally there was no reason to live in the Princess Hall anymore. No matter what he became in front of her, he would always be a childlike existence, and she wouldn't worry that Xian Pei would want to harm her. This was a mother's instinct. So Zhang Ruan just paused for a moment, then pushed the door and walked in without looking back. The study was quite dark, and the curtains had been drawn so the room was dim. Zhang Ruan turned around and closed the door, then walked towards a desk. A small person was sitting on the large chair in front of the desk. The person was holding a brush, and seemed to be writing something. He looked serious, but because he was too small, the scene seemed a little comical since he was dwarfed by the furniture around him. And so, his usual aura of seeming estranged and aloof from others was drowned out. Zhang Ruan walked towards him slowly. The child lowered his head and wrote earnestly. The posture of holding the brush was inexplicably familiar. With his head lowered, one could see the delicate nose and rosy lips that complemented his fair jade-like complexion. He truly seemed like an exquisitely engraved jade doll. Zhang Ruan watched silently. In the dim light to one side, she finally saw the words on the paper clearly. It was actually 4 words made up of 2 names. One was Zhang Ruan and the other was Xian Pei. As if Zhang Ruan was struck by lightning, she froze in place. In her mind, it was as if someone had torn a picture, and suddenly it appeared in front of her. From the depths of her memories, in that simple and crude palace, wearing ill-fitting clothes, that surprisingly delicate yet graceful child of hers asked clumsily holding a brush, "Mother Consort, look, Peyer has learned to write the names of Mother Consort and me." The child smiled happily, but the words he said made people feel sad. For a prince of a grand dynasty like him to be this neglected that not even a teacher had been invited to teach him was such. Perhaps no one would notice whether this unfavored prince was knowledgeable or not, but as his mother consort, Xian Pei's calligraphy was taught by her personally. The first thing she taught Xian Pei to write was his and her name, and that's what Xian Pei said at the time. Today those 2 names were still on the snow-white rice paper, and the handwriting was exactly the same as in the previous life, so much so that every minute detail was the same. The scene in front of her eyes and the scene in her memory suddenly overlapped, and for a moment Zhang Ruan couldn't tell whether it was day or night in front of her, and maybe all this was just a dream, but she couldn't tell for sure. Xian Pei put down the brush in his hand, and as if he heard her voice, he finally raised his head. When he saw her, he smiled sweetly and said, "Mother Consort, Peyer has been waiting for you for a long time." Zhang Ruan paused and suddenly took 2 steps back, her eyes, which were always calm, filled with bewilderment, as well as disbelief and shock. She murmured, "What did you say? Is Mother Consort still planning to recognize me?" "I'm Peyer," Xian Pei said. Zhang Ruan's eyes were wide open, and her mind was blank. She stared at the handsome young man in front of her. He clearly looked exactly the same as Pear in her previous life, but his smile was delicate and full of meaning. Definitely not the innocent and kind child in her previous life who didn't understand anything. He seemed much smarter than Pear in her previous life. Xianpei smiled bitterly and wryly as he looked up at Zhang Ruan. He slowly put away his smile, and stopped giving her an innocent look and said, Mother Consort lived and died in the depths of chaos, and Pear also entered the Yellow Springs after that. I thought that my life would be cut short. And although I didn't want the heavens to give me another chance, still, in this life I had not expected that I would be able to meet Mother Consort once more. He looked at Zhang Ruan. Today, Mother Consort, don't you want to recognize me? Every word he said was like a heavy hammer hitting Zhang Ruan's heart. No one would know these things and he didn't lie. Even before, there was only a trace of disbelief, but now all those doubts had vanished. Zhang Ruan didn't know whether it was joy or sadness in her heart. She just felt a kind of surprise of finding something lost. She strode forward and wanted to reach out to touch Xianpei's face, but her hand suddenly stopped in front of Xianpei. Others didn't know why, but I knew very well that it was the handiwork of that pair of mother and son, Imperial Consort Chun and Xianli. Xianpei sneered. It's a pity that I was too young at that time. I was also too weak to dare to confront them head-on. So I pretended to be a fool, and willing to be an unfavored prince just like in the past life. In this way at least I could save my life. Zhang Ruan gently touched his head. Pear did a good job. You are very smart. Chapter 197. Chapter 197. Filing a petition. Zhang Ruan was left feeling both surprised and amused at the same time. You're speaking nonsense, she scolded Xianpei, tapping his forehead. She did, however, consider his words seriously in her heart. Naturally, Xiao Xiao had no idea that she had lived two lives, and when her past and present lives were added together, she was a lot older than him. Furthermore, she herself felt it was unreasonable that she was so much older than her man. Even though it didn't show in her outward appearance, this matter still unnerved her. Seeing Zhang Ruan seriously pondering over this, Xianpei's eyes flashed with dissatisfaction. I didn't know about his relationship with you before, he said, taking Zhang Ruan's hand in his. When Jinying Wang unexpectedly proposed, I thought it was a bad idea for Mother Consort to marry him. But later, I realized that he was the only one in this world who could stand up to Xianli. As a consequence, it is more preferable to marry into the Jinying Wangfu than to become involved with Xianli. Even though Jinying Wang has gained something priceless without too much effort. Xianpei coldly snorted, clearly upset. Before he got reacquainted with her in this life, Zhang Ruan had already married Xiao Xiao. Still, he believed that Xiao Xiao's position would be secure, regardless of how the dynasty changed in the future, because the Jinying Wangfu had extensive influence. However, if he had known earlier that Zhang Ruan had also been reborn in this world, he would not have allowed Xiao Xiao to marry her so easily. Zhang Ruan laughed and patted his head. Don't pretend to be so mature at such a young age. However, she had forgotten that when she was reborn, she was no different from Xianpei. Anyway, Mother Consort, it's very fortunate that we can still meet again, Xianpei said, holding her hand. I sense that something is amiss in the palace these days. Besides Xianli's lack of action, there is also the matter of poisoning. Someone is secretly observing you. Mother Consort, please be careful. Don't worry about me. Zhang Ruan shook her head. I'm not usually in the palace, and the Jinying Wangfu is heavily guarded, making it difficult for someone to achieve their objectives smoothly. As for you, the deep palace is rife with danger. We are both aware of the perils that lie within. Besides, you are now favored by the emperor. I don't know how many people are secretly watching you, waiting to catch even the slightest mistake that can be used against you. Pear, you must not confront them head-on. Instead, if any situation should arise, send someone immediately to the Jinying Wangfu. After I go back, I will ask Xiao Xiao to find a few people to protect you. He finally felt his mother's long-lost care again. Xianpei had witnessed the palace's indifference and experienced poignant desolation in this life. He never trusted anyone and refused to accept kindness from others. Jiang Ruan was the only one who could penetrate the most vulnerable part of his heart. Thus Xian Pei was touched by her gentle and caring words, and he almost cried. However, he was no longer the child who would cry and laugh freely like he did in his past life. He blinked, fighting back the tears. "Mother Consort, don't worry too much," he reassured her with a smile. "The people around me are not to be trifled with. Xiao Xiao's men are too noticeable. Placing them by my side will quickly raise people's suspicions. Although many people in this palace want to deal with me, let them come if they have the ability, and we'll see who ends up being unlucky. Besides, Imperial Father has a lot of trust in me now, and should anyone even think of causing me harm, he will not stand by and take things lying down." Jiang Ruan couldn't detect any unusual emotions in his tone when he mentioned the emperor. For a moment she couldn't tell what Xian Pei was thinking, so she looked at him and reminded, "Pei, now that His Majesty trusts you, in the eyes of others it could be misconstrued as having ulterior motives. Furthermore, you are aware that this is not unfounded. What do you think? I'd like to hear your thoughts." She asked hesitantly. Every prince's ultimate ambition was to sit on the throne. Nonetheless, she didn't want Xian Pei to compete for the position and deny himself the happiness he deserved. The eunuch on the other side explained hastily, "To answer Junju, Yuan Chuan is an envoy of the Tianjin kingdom." Jiang Ruan calmly examined Yuan Chuan in front of her, only noticing that his attire was not characteristic of someone from Tianjin. There was an indescribable aura surrounding him that made people uncomfortable. Yuan Chuan faced her with his eyes obscured by his hat, making it impossible to see his expression and even more difficult to deduce his thoughts. "So you are an envoy of the Tianjin kingdom?" Jiang Ruan smiled. Great Jin has a vast territory and abundant resources. It is wide and rich, so envoy can take the time to stroll around and expand your horizons. Guests are always welcome in Great Jin. Her remarks were sarcastic. Why should the envoy of a defeated nation act in such a noble and benevolent manner when he was only there to submit a letter of surrender? And in her words, she made no attempt to hide the fact that Tianjin was a tiny nation with short-sighted people. The two young eunuchs turned pale. Although he was an envoy from a defeated nation, they still owed him some respect. Otherwise, rumors would spread that the royal family of Great Jin used their position to bully others. On the other hand, Hong'an Junju was now genieing Wang Fei, and she could not be offended either. For a brief moment, the two eunuchs were uneasy, hoping that Yuan Chuan was a gentle person who would not take this matter seriously. Yuan Chuan indeed seemed very gentle. In the face of the irony hidden in Jiang Ruan's speech, he unexpectedly showed no resentment. "I just saw Junju coming out of Nanhuayuan. Yuan Chuan knows that Nanhuayuan is the residence of 13th Prince," he said with a smile. "Even if there is no blood relationship, I did not expect Junju to have such a deep sibling relationship with 13th Prince." The two eunuchs' faces turned pale again. They assumed earlier that Yuan Chuan had a gentle temperament, but now they had the impression that this man was truly repulsive. He was insinuating that Jiang Ruan and Xian Pei were just putting up a front, and in turn wanted to ruin Jiang Ruan's reputation. Had Jiang Ruan not been married, who knew what kind of uproar this sentence would have caused if it spread out? Jiang Ruan smiled, as if unaware of Yuan Chuan's slander. A strange light flashed across her beautiful face, but it vanished in an instant. Then she said with a smile, 13th brother asked me to find a few rare books outside the palace, and by chance I happened to find them. Additionally, Empress Dowager also wanted to send some items to 13th brother, which I delivered. I wonder if Yuan Chuan has any objections?" She had already planned ahead of time to use Empress Dowager Ida's name to get out of a predicament if such a situation arose. That sentence Yuan Chuan was filled with irony. How could a Tianjin envoy speak out to discipline a Great Jin royal family member over family matters? He had really stretched his hand out too far. Yuan Chuan paused and did not speak for a long time, but the two eunuchs around him were already quite furious. Outsiders had no say in one's own country, but now an envoy dared to express his thoughts on royal family matters. He must have ulterior motives, and thus Yuan Chuan infuriated them. After some time Yuan Chuan remarked, "Junju is truly gentle and kind, a good older sister who loves her younger brother. He couldn't find out anything, even though he had his suspicions. Empress Dowager Ida and the rare books she had brought to the prince were solid pieces of evidence that no one could find fault with. Jiang Ruan treated Xian Pei's affairs with meticulous care, especially now when countless pairs of eyes were staring at him in the palace. Jiang Ruan would never do anything that could be used against him in the future. Even an ordinary meeting was planned flawlessly, so no one could use it against him. Likewise, I only have similar praise for you. Jiang Ruan smiled. Yuan Chuan lowered his head slowly. In that case, Yuan Chuan won't stop Junju from leaving. After saying that, he gave a strange salute which was probably a custom of Tianjin Kingdom. Jiang Ruan smiled as she looked at him and said, "Envoy, please take care as well." Due to Xian Pei, Jiang Ruan spent the rest of the day reorganizing her thoughts. Meeting Xian Pei again was a pleasant surprise, like a treasure that was lost and found again. It helped to alleviate some of her grief over Baiji's death. Lu Zhu was perplexed, while Lin Xiao suspected it had something to do with Xian Pei but didn't know the exact reason. Jiang Ruan even managed to go through the piled-up account books after her mood improved. After staying in the study until late at night, Lin Xiao came in and said, "Miss, it's time to rest." Jiang Ruan put down the book in her hand and rubbed her eyes. She got up, freshened up, and returned to her bedroom. Xiao Xiao was just trying to tease her. He thought it was amusing that the girl who usually acted cold and killed without mercy now looked so nervous. But he was caught off guard by her beauty, and even he, who was usually indifferent, found it hard to resist. His breathing grew faster and his head gradually leaned towards her. Jiang Ruan's eyes widened, and she found herself at a loss for what to do. In her past life, even at the height of her love for Xian Li, they had only held hands. She had never been so intimate with a man before, and did not know how to react. She closed her eyes and her heart pounded with nervousness. However, the kiss never arrived, and she was interrupted by Xiao Xiao's laughter. Jiang Ruan opened her eyes to find Xiao Xiao smiling at her, as if he found her reactions amusing. Jiang Ruan struggled free and wrapped herself tightly in the blanket, feeling angry and embarrassed. Feeling helpless, Xiao Xiao hugged her from outside the blanket and warned her, "Be careful, don't get suffocated." Jiang Ruan ignored him, but Xiao Xiao said quietly, "Arwan, it's all my fault. I was nervous." His words were so shameless that Jiang Ruan suddenly sat up, pulled off the blanket, and glared at him. Xiao Xiao found her even more amusing now. Despite her usual coldness and sharpness, he was the only one who could see this side of her. He felt pleased with himself. Jiang Ruan, however, lost her temper at the sight of his handsome face and coldly said, "Lend me Jin-san tomorrow. I have something to do." "All right." Xiao Xiao agreed without hesitation. "They're all your people, so you don't have to tell me." "And are you my person?" Jiang Ruan asked him with a sidelong glance. "I'm your person." Xiao Xiao couldn't help laughing again. "Oh, shameless." Jiang Ruan couldn't recall how she fell asleep, but she felt they had gotten closer than before. At least it made her feel much more at ease that there was one more person in bed. She had grown accustomed to the feeling of Xiao Xiao's presence. While Jiang Ruan and Xiao Xiao were eating breakfast, Steward Lin came in singing a ditty and carefully searched the entire bed. When he didn't find what he was looking for, he left dejectedly with his head hung low. After the meal, Xiao Xiao had to leave to take care of other matters, while Jiang Ruan stayed in the Wangfu. Jin-san hurried over after she was given the instruction. Seeing Jiang Ruan sitting and arranging her books, she asked, "What does young foreign want Jin-san to do?" Jiang Ruan told Jin-san exactly what she wanted done. Jin-san was surprised. "Did young foreign not tell master?" "He most likely already knows I'm going to do this," Jiang Ruan said with a slight smile. "I also heard him have someone get those in the investigation department ready. Young foreign making such a bold move will undoubtedly attract gossip. Although these outsiders' words don't need to be taken to heart, but if Jin-san may be so bold as to ask why young foreign wants to do this at this crucial time, do you have another intent?" Jin-san asked. Jiang Ruan gave her a faint smile but did not hide the truth from her. "I would have done this anyway, it was just a matter of time." But I'm picking now just because I'm fed up. Even though it seems like I'm targeting him, I'm actually aiming at that person in the palace. The greater the commotion, the greater her panic. I am forcing her to make a move because she is cautious and I can't grasp her weakness. People only make mistakes when they are panicked. Everything has been set up so that she will make mistakes and fall into my hands. After pondering for a while, Jean-san eventually realized her intention and exclaimed in surprise, "Young foreign is so clever." She then asked, "But there must be another tough battle today. Doesn't young foreign need master to accompany her?" The genie guard now sincerely admired Zhang Ruan for refusing to flee but staying in the genieing Wangfu to protect it and keep their strength a secret. The genie guard held this mistress in the highest regard. People's hearts are made of flesh, and if she had something to do, they would assist her without hesitation. "It's not necessary," Zhang Ruan smiled. "I am, after all, the mistress of this Wangfu. If I can't even handle something as simple as this, I'm clearly not strong enough. This is my own business and I can handle it." Both of the young women on the left and right sides looked angry as they beat the drum. After a while an official walked out and yelled, "Who is beating the drum of justice?" These servants beat the drum of justice on behalf of the eldest daughter of the Jiang family. A petition is posted above. Please, Darren, hold a trial to investigate and bring to justice the person responsible for the murder of Minister Zhang Fu's former foreign. Chapter 198. Chapter 198. Breaking off relations with the Jiang Fu. As soon as these words were spoken, the surrounding crowd broke into an uproar. The farcical situation of the Jiang Fu a few years ago was common knowledge throughout the capital. At that time, Xia Yan's family background was stainless, and she had a good reputation for her virtue and artistic talent. Later on, after the truth about her shameful morals and conduct was revealed, she had become an object of much disgust. Consequently, upon hearing the words spoken by these two maidservants, it was as if a stone had been abruptly thrown into a peaceful lake, setting off ripples that could not be stopped. Those who were older remembered the former foreign of the Jiang Fu, Zhao Mei. Speaking of which, every person who had some impression of Zhao Mei truly had a good opinion of her. Zhao Mei had been a natural-born beauty, with a pure, kind-hearted temperament. When she married into the Jiang Fu, she often helped the impoverished. She had never favored the rich nor disdained the poor, and neither had she put on the airs of a lady from the upper class. She had been so amiable and approachable that it had shocked people. However, in the end, this good reputation had been attributed to Minister Jiang, adding considerable leverage to his official career. Jiang Quan's reputation of incorruptibility at that time might very well have all been due to Zhao Mei. It was just that as Zhao Mei slowly faded from people's sight, the gentle and virtuous Xia Yan made an appearance, with the reputation for being a talented woman. Moreover, Jiang Quan had deliberately used his authority and power to elevate her status at every opportunity. As a result, people only remembered that the only foreign of Jiang Fu was Xia Yan, not the original Zhao Mei. However, now that these maidservants had mentioned it, some people began to recollect the beautiful and kind-hearted woman from back then. There is good in the human heart, and so several people, keen on ensuring that justice was served, opened their mouths to say, "Oh, which damned creature harmed the former Jiang foreign? The former Jiang foreign was such a good person, so amiable." The official came forward to receive the petition from Lian Qiao's hands and eyed the crowd. These days, Hong Junju was a mighty figure in the capital, and had such a huge backer in the genieing Wangfu. Thus, once he heard Zhang Ruan's name, he did not dare to show neglect in this situation. After calling out a few times for the crowd not to make a racket, he went back inside with the document in his hands. Burn your hand, feel the heat. Figure arrogance of the powerful / a mighty figure no one dares approach / hot, exciting or in favor. Generally speaking, it took a day for the investigation department to start proceedings in court. By and large, ordinary cases went directly to the yamen to be heard. Only when the case involved a great grievance of injustice brought forward by a member of the nobility, and also because there were fears that the power and influence of the accusing party would be so formidable that the yamen officials might intervene or cause the case to be unfairly resolved, then the case would be sent to the investigation department. This department could also choose whether or not to pursue and try a case. After all, the lives of the rich were full of twists and turns, and a little carelessness might invite disaster upon oneself. However, today, since an official had dared to take on the responsibility of resolving the complaint, it was evident that a superior had given him prior instructions. To receive the petition was to investigate and try the case, so the surrounding crowd knew that there would once again be some fun to watch the following day. Yamen. Government office in feudal China. There are local officials in charge of hearing cases. The Yamen servants in the Yamen assist local officials in searching for evidence and arresting criminals. Lu Zhu, whose resentment was overflowing, intentionally called out loudly, the concubine of the Jiangfu, Xia Yan, poisoned mistress with murderous intent, and harmed the D son and D daughter using vicious methods. Minister Jiang, as the head of the family, knew full well what was happening, but feigned ignorance and simply went along with the situation. When mistress died, he claimed it was due to ill health. I humbly beg the investigation department to diligently examine and try this case, to return a clean reputation and justice to my miss and deceased mistress. The crowd, which had been on the point of dispersing, was stirred up once again. Lu Zhu's words could be said to have the effect of igniting an earth-shattering scandal. In reality, in wealthy families, it was not surprising for concubines to plot to do away with the main wife. But if Jiang Quan knew perfectly well what was going on yet pretended to be deaf and mute, and even tacitly agreed with Xia Yan's methods, this would be the first time something like this occurred. Any official in the capital with a good reputation, and who was not a fool, would absolutely not let this pass. If everything was exposed, this would be a huge stain. The struggles between women in the rear residence were always due to the jealousy of rivals and affection. Men should not be involved, nor should they not worsen the situation. If a man could treat his own first wife with such cruelty, how could he possess any humanity at all? If previously Jiang Quan had simply been perceived as a joke of a man who could not handle the affairs of his rear residence, now with Lu Zhu's words, from henceforth Jiang Quan would be regarded as the capital's representative of the ugly man. He was hypocritical, vicious, and could even throw his own flesh and blood away without looking back. A father like him was surely one in a million. Lu Zhu and Lian Qiao looked at each other and smiled, feeling as refreshed as if they had forcefully expelled foul air. They had been by Zhang Ruan's side for many years, and had clearly seen Jiang Quan's attitude towards Zhang Ruan. It would be better not to have such a father. The injustice of Zhao Mei's death, the way Zhang Ruan and Zhang Exanji had been bullied and mistreated by anyone and everyone, to the present situation where no one would dare to underestimate them. This could be considered small revenge, and they were extremely happy. The matter of Hong and Junju suing her biological father spread throughout the entire capital rapidly. Xia Yan and the Xia family were already gone, Zhang Chao and Zhang Susu were also dead. Naturally, the dead cannot testify. The only one still alive was Jiang Quan, which meant that all the criticism was aimed at him. In the palace, Zhang Ruan looked at the sun in the sky. The snow had stopped falling early in the morning, there was even a little sunlight and the weather was good. She slowly lifted her teacup to take a sip, before addressing Jin San and Tianju who were next to her. "Let's go, it's about time." Tianju got up, draped an ermine cloak over Zhang Ruan's shoulders, and handed her a hand stove asterisk before accompanying her out of the door. China antique metal hand warmer and incense burner, 19th century, Schneeable Fine Arts LLC. Court ladies with hand stoves in hands. A hand stove is a mini stove in the shape of a teapot. When walking outside, people held one hand stove that kept their hands warm and ready for writing. Today the Jiangfu was particularly busy. Since Zhang Chao's death, no, it should be said, starting many years ago when Jiang Quan's official career had begun to go downhill, the Jiangfu no longer resembled its early days, when there was an endless stream of horses and carriages at its front door. At that time, when Jiang Quan was like a fish in water at the imperial court, there were people calling on him every day, and the invitation cards were piled so high that it was impossible to close the lid of the table. Jiang Quan would discuss the current political situation with the high officials and members of the nobility, while Xia Yan would engage in pleasantries and chit-chat with the noble Furens. They were both so adept at these social niceties that the entire Fu would be full of the sound of laughter and conversation. and Zhang Chao would always return from the Imperial Academy pleased as punch with his success, conversing forthrightly with his newly made friends from influential families. Kong Ho, Chinese harp. At that time, old Zhang Madam was still alive. Second Yinyang and Zhang Li were angered by Xia Yan daily but dared not speak out, and Zhang Dan timidly hid herself in her room. And so, when all was said and done, it could be said to be a period of prosperity. People speculated that the seemingly clean and virtuous Zhang Fu would one day become the pillar of strength of the imperial court, as they had sufficient loyalty and made no mistakes. All this prosperity seemed to exist just yesterday, where the liveliness of the Fu had nothing to do with Zhang Ruan. It was as if Zhao Mei and her children were total strangers. However, later, when she returned from the rural residence, the Zhang Fu appeared to fall under a demonic influence and gradually declined. The glory of former days had long disappeared, and even if the time for vengeance had not yet arrived, the heavens were still watching from above. The seeds of sin that the Zhang Fu had planted in the past had finally borne fruit in the present disaster. Today, with Zhang Ruan's petition, the truth behind all of the incidents that the Zhang Fu had constantly faced over the past few years had been ripped open for all to see. Ordinary people were simple and straightforward in their thoughts and actions. Some people immediately settled themselves in front of the Zhang Fu and threw eggs and vegetable leaves at the main gate. The Zhang Fu's guards came out to stop them but were met with a torrent of verbal abuse which they did not dare to retaliate against. Hence, they could only retreat with their tails between their legs and close the gate in the face of the hot anger of the people. Indeed, it was dangerous to incur public wrath. Just as the crowd was brimming with righteous indignation, they saw a horse carriage slowly making its way through the crowd, and they parted to let it through. The horse carriage was exquisitely made but not ostentatious, with a subdued aesthetic. The coachman was a tall, handsome young man, and one could tell at a glance that he was from the upper class. With one look, people could guess that the person inside the carriage was a wealthy and respectable person. Seeing as how the carriage was headed for the Zhang Fu, the crowd fell silent to wait and watch. Finally, the horse carriage stopped, the curtain was drawn aside, and two young ladies with their heads held high jumped out. Both ladies bowed as they assisted yet another lady out of the horse carriage. This lady was wearing a dark red velvet jacket embroidered with flowers, with a bright jade green skirt of silk crepe scattered with flowers. These bright colors were not garish, but instead were shockingly glamorous. Over these she wore a woven golden ermine cloak, and she held a small stove in her hands. Her skin was as fair as jade, and her appearance was movingly lovely, while her hair was simply combed in a duo-ma hairstyle, thus suppressing her beauty and vitality by a few degrees. Her charming eyes were so limpid as to be astonishing, but her gaze was flat, tempering her breathtaking brightness and color with a measure of somberness and indifference. Duo-ma ji. The characteristic of this hairstyle is that the hair is tied in a bun to one side in a downward shape. Someone in the crowd recognized her and exclaimed, "Isn't that the eldest daughter of the Zhang family, Hong and Junju?" The Zhang family's eldest daughter. That was what she was first known as. Even though she was both Jining Wangfei and Hong and Junju, she was eldest Miss Zhang first and foremost. Her appearance here at present provoked much thought. Everyone knew that she had sent her own personal maidservants at the crack of dawn to present her petition at the investigation department. So what was she doing at the Zhang Fu now? The onlookers were watching avidly to see what she would do next. Zhang Ruan sent Tianzhu a knowing glance which she immediately understood. She walked up to the main gate of the Zhang Fu and knocked lightly 3 times. Her actions were polite and gentle, not at all like someone who had come to find fault, but instead like someone who had come to visit, full of courtesy. She then said, deferentially, "Would you kindly communicate that my Wangfei has returned today to visit her parents?" Gwining. It is the day when the newlyweds visit the woman's natal family after marriage, and it is also the first time for the groom to formally meet his parents-in-law as a son-in-law. The newlyweds go to the woman's home with gifts on a certain day after marriage, and the woman's family must also prepare a banquet at this time. In ancient times, transportation was inconvenient, and returning home may be the last chance for a woman to set foot in her natal home. Because of this, people attach great importance to this wedding custom. When Zhang Ruan had married into the Jining Wangfu, She had not been able to make this formal visit to her parents before she was poisoned. However, even though this was the case, the Jiangfu was not thousands of miles away from the Jining Wangfu. If he had had the mind to, Jiang Quan could have sent someone to inquire after her. Who could have imagined that Jiang Quan would actually keep silent and make no mention of this at all? It was as if he never had such a daughter. Now that Tianzhu had brought up this visit to the parents, the onlookers collectively gasped. Everyone knew that the Jiang family's eldest daughter and Jiang Quan were not close, but it was so cold to return to visit her parents after being a newlywed for so long. It was truly a joke at this point. The people within did not respond for a long time, so Tianzhu carefully retreated to stand behind Zhang Ruan. The three of them stood quietly at the gate of Jiangfu, while the surrounding crowd talked in low voices among themselves, somewhat shocked at Zhang Ruan's coldness at this moment. Her eyes were deeply shadowed, and it seemed as if she was not looking at the Jiangfu, but was standing at a distance from the main gate of Jiangfu contemplating all the many years that had passed. Zhang Ruan's thoughts returned to her previous life. It had been on a similarly snowy day that she had returned to the Jiangfu from the rural residence for the first time. This was her own family, yet it was as if she was living under someone else's roof and relying on their charity. She had stood at the door of the Jiangfu, nervous but happy. She had been dressed in shabby clothes, and the surrounding crowd had pointed at her, each person conjecturing her identity. She had felt ashamed and wanted to hide her face. At this very door, Xia Yan and Jiang Susu had worn brightly colored and beautiful clothes to greet her. The more gentle and refined they were, the greater the contrast had been with her utter coarseness. It was precisely under this plaque of Jiangfu that the tightly closed great door had opened, and all kinds of harm and humiliation poured out. From the main door of Jiangfu to the main door of the Deep Palace, each step of the journey had placed her in an even more pitiable state than before. The scenes of her previous life were like a joke, constantly reminding her of those unbearable past moments. And now, Zhang Ruan raised her head, and her gaze landed upon the huge plaque of the Jiangfu. This plaque had been bestowed by the former emperor, and was Jiang Quan's pride, but at some point in time it had started to collect dust. In her previous life, Xia Yan's favorite pastime had been to order the servants to wipe the plaque until it was spick and span, as if it represented the glory of the Jiangfu. Now the Jiang family was close to collapse. In this lifetime when she returned to the Jiang family it had been here, at this very place. Outside the main gate she had sworn an oath to slaughter every single person who had harmed her loved ones in her previous life. She had planted a seed of revenge here, and now this seed had already broken through the ground and grown into a towering tree. With just a little more exertion, she would be able to uproot this colossal burial mound that had buried her and her loved ones. After who knows how long, the door finally creaked open. From behind the doorkeeper a man wearing the garb of an official slowly came forth. His countenance was gloomy, and he stared fiercely at Zhang Ruan. Perhaps Jiang Quan had just left the court and had not had time to change clothes, or it could be that he intended to dress in such a manner in order to suppress Zhang Ruan's power. However, he looked really haggard. Zhang Ruan smiled slightly, and politely greeted him. "Father, it has been a while since we met." A while since they met. Jiang Quan looked almost completely different from the scholarly and decisive middle-aged man in Zhang Ruan's mind. He had lost a considerable amount of weight, and his complexion had become very tanned. The cheekbones on both sides of his face stood out sharply due to his deeply sunken cheeks, and he was exceptionally thin. His entire being gave the impression of being old and frail. Jiang Quan had always placed a great deal of importance on his appearance. Before, even though he was 40 years old, he looked like he was 30, youthful and refined. Now, he was a man who was not so good-looking, perhaps a few degrees short of collapse. Only the cold indifference and acrimony in his gaze was exactly the same as in her previous life. Jiang Quan sneered and said, "Visiting one's parents. Do you still have any regard for my Jiang family?" Zhang Ruan nodded and said, "I keep father in my heart at all times. I have never dared to forget." How could one forget deep hatred and humiliation? The corners of her mouth lifted slightly as she said, "It's just that father does not seem to like this daughter in this way." These words were clearly intended to accuse Jiang Quan of being an inhumane father. Angry and anxious, Jiang Quan barked out. I brought you up and provided all your food and clothing allowance. Don't forget I'm still your father. Without me, could you have grown to this age? Like a bird fleeing the nest, now that you no longer need those who raised you, and you have your own means of support, here you are actually fabricating lies to ridicule your father. Which crude rural area taught you this uncivilized standard of morality? Jiang Quan had always maintained a scholarly air and spoken with extreme refinement. Never before had outsiders seen him curse anyone so vulgarly. At present, it was probably the unease in his heart that was causing him to speak recklessly, but it certainly had the result of enabling the onlookers to see his true colors. Without father, I would naturally not exist, Zhang Ruan said coolly. Thanks to father, when mother was still around, Dage and I saw father no more than 10 times a year, whereas Xia Yinyang's children, second sister and second brother, were together with father the entire day. Second brother could go into father's study, but even Dage's teachers had to be invited by mother herself. Second sister had the best Momo to teach her the 4 arts, playing the qin, chess, calligraphy, painting, while I was personally taught by mother, but mother came from a family of generals, so she knew nothing about the arts. Father, could it be that you will claim that you empathized with mother's loving heart which wanted us to stay only beside her all day long? The question was full of sarcasm. Jiang Quan's face slowly turned red, and he immediately opened his mouth to retort this. However, it was exceedingly pleasant to stay beside mother, so it was no problem. I had no love for the 4 arts, and to this date, Dage has never had any practice in the language of officialdom. This is all thanks to father's foresight. Ridicule flashed for a moment in Zhang Ruan's eyes as she continued, but when Dage was sick and we urgently wanted to send for a doctor, Xia Yinyang claimed that father had already gone to bed and said to wait until next day, so mother had to use her only resource. She kept Dage warm with her body heat the entire night. If it were not that he is fated to have a long life, Dage would not be living so calmly today. What explanation will father give for this? Not waiting for Jiang Quan's response, Zhang Ruan smiled and said, Father was busy with official business, so I avoided the topic. Thus, when mother was seriously ill, father did not come. When she was lying on her deathbed, even then father did not come. It was only on the day when Xia Yinyang's status was raised from that of concubine to wife, father came, bringing second brother and second sister, and everyone was very happy. After that, Dage left home in a fury, and I was sent to the rural residence. She smiled lightly and said, Does father remember why I was sent to the rural residence? Because a Taoist priest said I was born under a cursed star, who would be the bane of others' existence. But 5 years later, when I returned to the capital, that Taoist priest repeated his old tricks and was exposed as a liar. Does father remember who employed this Taoist priest? It was father's most loved concubine at that time, later acknowledged as your first wife, Xia Yinyang. Zhang Ruan drew out her words and sighed at the end of them, instilling fear and alarm in the hearts of the onlookers. If not even a young girl was let off, Xia Yan's heart was indeed immensely merciless. Is father thinking of saying that you had no idea of such happenings? Then there are too many things that father did not know about. For example, on the day my Dage returned to the capital, he met with an ambush in the forest, and the intent was clearly to kill him. If General Guan had not rushed to help turn the tide of the situation, all signs indicated that it would have been a disaster. Does father know who was behind it all? Of course, father has no idea, because it was father's beloved concubine, Xia Yinyang. Zhang Ruan smiled minutely and said, Father wants to be an honest and upright official, but you don't even truly know the person who shared your bed. On seeing this, your daughter feels somewhat sorry for you. Some of the onlookers were sneering while others were pointing accusingly at Jiang Quan. They said, so, it turns out that the Jiangfu is such a sinister place. No wonder General Jiang wanted to join the military, otherwise, how could he have protected himself and his younger sister? Eventually there would have been nothing left of them, not even their bones. Hu Shuelong Tan. Lit. Cave of Tigers, Pool of Dragons. Xia Yan's viciousness had reached the stage where it caused people's hair to stand on end, after realizing what would have happened if both Jiang Xinji and Zhang Ruan had not been let off. And who knew how many old grudges Xia Yan had held against Zhao Mei? A foreign with such a malicious heart. If Jiang Quan claimed that he was not aware of anything, then one was truly looking down on this third-rank official. No one believed that this was the case. It could only be that he had turned a blind eye to what had occurred. Even if one said that Jiang Quan was merely taking advantage of Zhao Mei's death to elevate Xia Yan, this was still undeniably cruel and unscrupulous. But to be unaware of anything pertaining to his son and daughter, that was something that everyone could not fathom. It was said that a tiger, though cruel, would not devour its cubs. In that case, was Jiang Quan's heart made of iron? What rubbish are you spouting? Jiang Quan's anger was born of humiliation, as well as the fear that Zhang Ruan would reveal even more secrets. You don't have any evidence, and here you are babbling nonsense. Who told you to say such things to insult my Jiang Fu? What is his motive? Jiang Quan was indeed a crafty old fox, quickly thinking of a way to arouse everyone's suspicions. As a child of the Jiang Fu, Zhang Ruan would naturally not wrongly accuse her own father without reason. But what if there was someone behind her directing her accusations? Since Zhang Ruan was now married to Jining Wang, Jiang Quan was clearly implying that this person was Xiao Xiao. Anger showed briefly in the eyes of Tianzhu and Jin San. Jiang Quan trying to falsely accuse someone at this point was truly an unforgivable crime. Zhang Ruan gave a small smile and said, "Father, all this is not important. Of course I have evidence of when Xianyang asked someone to poison my mother. Mother told me about it, so you don't have to accuse others indiscriminately." Straight away, the surrounding crowd burst into hoots of laughter. Jiang Quan thought that Zhang Ruan was simply trying to frighten him. So many years had passed, and Zhang Ruan at that time was a mere child who did not know anything. Now that Xia Yan was dead, how could there be any evidence? Jiang Quan was not worried, but Zhang Ruan had made such a fuss that he felt he had lost all face today. Instantly he said furiously, "You really want to do this? Evil girl, you have the impertinence to file a petition against your own biological father. Is this how you show filial piety? Is this how you treat your biological father?" In this world, no matter what, when someone was judged according to filial piety, that person would be brought down a few notches regardless of who he or she was. Even if Jiang Quan's actions had been cruel and unscrupulous, he was still Zhang Ruan's biological father. There is no such thing as a daughter suing her father in this world. If your parents wanted you to die, then that was what you had to do. This was the common principle of ethics, and everyone on this earth had to abide by this principle. Seeing that Zhang Ruan remained silent, Jiang Quan's self-satisfaction showed for a split second in his eyes. Feeling that his back had become straighter and his confidence had been boosted, he said, "Don't forget, my blood runs in your body. Without me, you would not exist." The onlookers fell silent. Indeed, even if Zhang Ruan had spoken the truth, in berating Jiang Quan for his ruthlessness, the people's perspective of Zhang Ruan had become complicated. Suing one's biological father was a universally shocking affair, and even the Jining Wangfu was perceived as being a little strange. It was not an exaggeration to say that Zhang Ruan, as an offspring of the Zhang family, had overstepped her bounds in doing such a thing. Moreover, even if she eventually won this lawsuit, Zhang Ruan would still have to face the way people would look at her peculiarly. Zhang Ruan was not in the least affected by everyone's stares. She stood, elegant and slender amidst the cold wind. It was a kind of dauntless attitude, as if no manner of wind or storm could ever move her, and she seemed to declare to everyone that she would brook no compromise. Furthermore, her words were cold and unyielding, each one slowly drumming into the onlookers' ears. "In truth, Father, you gave me life. Without you I would not exist. You gave me half of my blood and bones, but the heavens know," she laughed grimly, "how disgusted I am." Before she had finished speaking, an exquisite dagger appeared in her hand. The crowd was startled, not knowing what she would do. The dagger lightly sliced through the back of her hand, and big drops of blood oozed out, blossoming into bright red flowers on the snowy ground. Her smile was brightly charming yet cruel. Her voice was cold and detached and resolute. In the face of Jiang Quan's stunned gaze, she said, elegantly, "Now I return it to you." Chapter 199. Chapter 199. Xiao Xiao gets angry. In a heartbeat, the onlookers fell silent and stared at Zhang Ruan in disbelief. There were intense and determined women on this earth, but none were as resolute and decisive as she was. Since the establishment of the Great Jin dynasty, Zhang Ruan was the first person to spill her own blood and return it to her father. Zanding Jiadi. Lit. To chop the nail and slice the iron. Fig, resolute and decisive / unhesitating / categorical. Shashua. To smear one's lips with the blood of a sacrifice as a means of pledging allegiance. Jin San and Tianju stood silently behind Zhang Ruan. Their eyes flitted to and fro minutely, but neither came forward to intervene. Earlier Zhang Ruan had informed them of her plans, however. She had not alerted Xiao Xiao about the matter. She knew that once Xiao Xiao knew about what she had decided to do, he would definitely put a stop to it. Although Jin San was Xiao Xiao's to command, she now obeyed Zhang Ruan from the bottom of her heart. As a husband, Xiao Xiao would naturally want to protect his wife. However, Jin San also knew that Zhang Ruan's approach was the best. It took a kind of audacity to announce to the entire world that she was cutting off all relations with the Jiangfu. From now onwards, it would no longer be possible for Jiang Quan to use their relationship by blood to threaten her. Her desire to sever the final link between her and the Jiangfu required a great deal of courage, but what could also be seen was the depth of her abhorrence for her own surname, Jiang. Jiang Quan ground his teeth, and the veins in his forehead bulged. If not for the watchful gaze of the onlookers, he would probably have killed Zhang Ruan right then and there. Not only that, Zhang Ruan's actions also caused him to feel slightly flustered. She had cut herself so calmly, and with such detachment and hatred in her expression, that she truly seemed to care not a whit about remaining a member of the Zhang family any longer. In the past, Zhang Quan had always viewed Zhang Ruan as a dispensable daughter. She was born of Zhao Mei, and was a constant reminder to him of those stifling days when he had been constantly suppressed by others and had to rein in his emotions. Thus he despised Zhang Ruan and deliberately neglected her. He knew that Zhang Ruan's temperament was soft and tender, and easy to manipulate, just like the cats and dogs that were raised at the Fu. Therefore, the mundane and everyday business of raising her was simply so that she could one day be put to good use. He only had to treat her with a little bit of warmth, and she would happily and diligently come forward to wag her tail for a while. However, who knew when the cats and dogs raised in this Fu had grown sharp claws? It should be after she had returned from the rural residence. Her personality had changed. She appeared calm and cool-headed, not at all like the person who had relied heavily on the Jiangfu in the past. Jiang Quan had thought nothing of this, for even if the situations involving the Xiao family and Jiang Susu seemed to be connected to Zhang Ruan, he firmly believed that no pet would ever bite the hands that fed it, and destroy its den with its own hands. Zhang Ruan would always need a parental family, and her only true blood relative apart from Zhang Xinji was him, Zhang Quan. Moreover, as long as there was this relationship by blood, Zhang Ruan would never be able to cause too much trouble. With filial piety as the common watchword, Zhang Ruan would always be at a disadvantage by established standards. But how dare she? Zhang Quan's eyes were shot through with red, like a trapped beast facing death. That woman's smiling visage was like the legendary red spider lily, beautiful and cruel, just like a monster born from a dense forest of bleached bones with a deceivingly beautiful appearance. The fresh blood from her hand continued dripping, silently making bloody flowers bloom in the snow. And yet, she did not seem to feel the slightest pain. Manju Shahua. These flowers are associated with death. They are said to grow in hell and guide the dead into the next reincarnation. Nicknames for this flower include hell flower, corpse flower, and death flower. Read more here and here. Zhang Xinji already had an excellent reputation among the common people. Now with these words, his candid and straightforward expression, and his action of protecting his younger sister from being wronged, he won wholehearted praise from everyone present. One might say that Zhang Ruan's recent actions were a tad excessive, but it was totally different when Zhang Xinji did it. Everyone felt that this Jiangfu could not possibly be such an innocent place if it caused the upright, noble god of war to be this disgusted. One feared that there must indeed have been intolerable bullying. Jiang Quan was almost completely crushed by Jiang Xianji's behavior. He looked at the tall, strapping young man before him. The young child in his memories who had meekly sought his favor was gone. The Jiang Xianji of the present fully displayed his spirit and talent. Even in his position as a court counselor, he was awed by Jiang Xianji's fame and military glory. However, this brother-sister pair had joined hands to deal with him, which was an affront to Jiang Quan's scruples. With one hand on his chest, panting deeply, he pointed at Jiang Xianji and said, "Unfilial. Disgraceful. Rebellious. Donbu Dao. Disgraceful of behavior that is unfilial, rebellious or otherwise in grave breach of the norms of society." Disdain flickered across Jiang Xianji's face. With a father like this, it would be better not to have one. He had never fulfilled his responsibilities as a father for even a single day from the time Jiang Xianji had been born. To the three of them, mother and children, he had only given endless humiliation and pain, and now, he even wanted to gain the upper hand over Jiang Ruan using filial piety. Jiang Xianji only cared about his Mimi, who had been compelled to the extreme of unfaltering self-mutilation in order to sever her ties with the Jiang Fu. Since Jiang Ruan wanted to do this, how could he not agree? Jiang Ruan frowned. She never imagined that Jiang Xianji would come here, but also there was nothing wrong with what he had done. However, as he was a military general, what he had done today would inevitably become the topic of debate among his colleagues in the imperial court in future. If someone deliberately began looking for situations where Jiang Xianji was skating on thin ice, they might make use of this opportunity to bring him down. Pondering over this, she could not help but blame herself somewhat. She should have found some excuse to conceal this from him. She had not thought that the news of the situation would leak out so quickly. As she was thinking, Xiao Xiao gently patted her hand. Jiang Ruan lifted her head to look at him as he walked forward unhurriedly. He was entirely clad in black while she was wearing dark red clothes, but they did not seem incompatible at all. The black and red combined to give an air of beautiful grandeur which was cold and aloof at the same time. Jiang Quan did not want to confront him head-on, but he could not let such insulting behavior pass. In an ill-mannered voice he said, "Xiao Wangye has come to criticize this old official? This old official is merely disciplining his own children. There is no need for Xiao Wangye to trouble himself over such family affairs. Our one is my wife." Xiao Xiao appeared not to have heard Jiang Quan as he continued dispassionately, "Husband and wife are of one body. If she wants to return Minister Zhang's blood, this person will also do so on her behalf." Having said so, he slid an exquisite dagger from his sleeve, turned it around in his hand, then drew it across the back of his hand lightly. Jiang Ruan's words caught in her throat. While it was true that Xiao Xiao did this for her, more than that, it also put a stop to any possibility that someone in future might use this situation to discredit Jiang Xianji. With Jinying Wang present, Jiang Xianji would not be the first person that people would attack. At the very least, people would not first think of the siblings' aggressive behavior. The two men stood shoulder to shoulder on the snowy ground, upon which bloomed more flowers of blood. One man was peerlessly beautiful, cold and elegant, while the other was bright and handsome, and as resolute as a mountain. The scene was exceptionally harmonious. As the snow silently fell, a sentimental woman among the crowd found her eyes moist, and covering her mouth with her hand, she murmured, "To have such a brother, to have such a husband, what more can anyone ask for?" Jiang Ruan slowly cast down her eyes. The wound on her hand did not pain her at all, but her heart ached and burned like acid. Two outstanding young men in this world were willing to shed blood for her. In this lifetime, how could someone like her deserve to have people sacrifice so much for her? Nonetheless, when she raised her eyes once again, Jiang Ruan's gaze had resumed its usual state of calm. Half smilingly, she looked at Jiang Quan, who by now had no idea how this matter would conclude, and said, "Father, today, after enough blood has been shed, the two of us, brother and sister, will have absolutely no connection with the Jiang Fu. From now onwards we are not members of the Jiang family. The benevolence and righteousness between father and children has reached its limit, and all ties are now severed." Many years later, whenever the people in the capital discussed that scene, the snowy ground, With flowers of blood bursting forth, they could not hold back their sighs. The bright face like a flower of the woman in red amidst the snow, the silhouettes of the two men firm and resolute, yet cold and detached, all this seemed to be deeply engraved in the minds of all who had been present. The magnificence which had unexpectedly been displayed was enough to fuel a lifetime's worth of earnest discussion, and it would never fade no matter the time. That night, as Xiao Xiao and Zhang Xing returned home, nothing seemed different about them apart from their slightly paler faces. The two of them had many years of hard work behind them, and they also had a strong foundation due to practicing martial arts. But even though it was said to be half a body's worth of blood, how could one possibly calculate this? It was just a gimmick to make others believe. Zhang Ruan never engaged in a loss-making business, and had earlier placed several bags of chicken blood in her sleeve. Even if Xiao Xiao and Zhang Xing had not arrived, she still had the means to escape unscathed. Later, she had gotten Tianju and Jin San to take advantage of the time when they were supporting Xiao Xiao and Zhang Xing to pass them the bags of blood, so that, in the end, they had shed blood amounting to half a body. Jiang Quan had been so angry that he had been reduced to a pitiable state, but there was nothing he could do except watch helplessly as they threw down one final phrase, "No more ties between us," before driving off in a horse carriage without a second thought. Zhang Xing would no longer reside in the Jiangfu. The official residence which the emperor had conferred upon him was still under construction, so he simply went to the General Fu. He and Zhao Guang now had a good relationship, and every time they discussed military strategies and tactics, it was as if the age gap between them was completely forgotten. After Zhang Ruan had briefly advised him, Zhang Xing had left, leaving Zhang Ruan and Xiao Xiao alone in the carriage. Xiao Xiao said nary a word, and his thoughts could not be discerned. All this made Zhang Ruan feel rather guilty. After an uncomfortable journey back to the Jining Wangfu, as soon as Xiao Xiao stepped inside, he was met at the door by Steward Lin. Steward Lin was just about to speak when Xiao Xiao said, "Young foreign has suffered a knife wound. Ask fifth brother Xia to write a prescription for some medicine." Stunned, Steward Lin's face immediately creased into a multitude of wrinkles. "Wounded again? Oh, my young foreign, how do you manage to injure yourself daily? If the old master and mistress look down from heaven and see this, they would blame Jining Wangfu for not being able to take good care of you. Jin San Tianju, do you not intend to stay on in the genie guard? You can't even do your job of protecting young foreign well. How can you be trusted with any other tasks in future? The ruin of the genie guard's reputation sooner or later will be entirely due to you two idiotic girls." Jin San and Tianju silently averted their eyes. Zhang Ruan was not in the mood to pick a bone with Steward Lin right then and there, so she lowered her head and followed Xiao Xiao into the house. Jin Er jumped down from a tree and said, "Master is angry with young foreign? It looks like he's not very happy." Jin Si had just finished eating a fruit and wiped her mouth with her hands. Hearing Jin Er's words, she immediately took out a silver bowl from her clothes and said, "Time to bet, time to bet. Bet big or bet small. Let's bet who will be the first to voluntarily admit wrong." "I'm betting on Master." Tianju was ordinarily very proper and would never participate in such a gamble, but today, for the very first time, she took a silver coin from her sleeve and said, "Young foreign is such a calm and composed person, and Master cares for her so much. Naturally, he won't be able to bear being angry with her for a prolonged period of time. Young foreign only has to frown, and Master's anger will disappear." She said all this seriously, but Jin Er scoffed at her and said, "Tianju, you have served as young foreign's maid to the extent that now all you can see is her. I don't think I have ever seen you giving Master this kind of adoration." Tianju stared at him coldly and said, "Young foreign is worthy of my esteem." All right, as you wish." Jin Er waved his hand and said, "I bet that young foreign will take the initiative to reconcile with Master." He took a silver-backed banknote and threw it into the bowl while saying, "Master is, for good or for ill, still a man. No matter how much a man loves his wife, he will always need to keep his self-respect. How could he take the initiative to coax a woman? That would just be spoiling her. No matter what, he is still our master. When have you ever seen our master admit his mistakes of his own volition?" Jin San thought briefly before digging out several pearls and throwing them into the bowl, saying, I bet on Master. Young Foreign is no ordinary woman. I have always felt that Master is completely under Young Foreign's thumb. Hey, why are you all looking at me like that? I'm also a woman, and my woman's intuition tells me this. At one side, Genie hefted his sword and made to walk away, but Jean C grabbed him and said, Oi, you should also say something. Genie, who will you bet on? Genie looked at the contents of the bowl, silently took a gold ingot from his sleeve, and uttered, I support Master. Then he turned and left. How loyal, Jean Eyre said as he raised his thumb, just before Steward Lin swiped him to the side with a blow. When Steward Lin saw the gold, silver, and pearls inside the bowl, he instantly exploded in rage. I told you that gambling is not allowed in the Wangfu as it breeds a bad atmosphere. I want Young Master to dock your pay. Why aren't you going to prepare the medicine? Go quickly. Zhang Ruan and Xiao Xiao were totally unaware of how the genie guards were messing around in secret. Xiao Xiao had not said a word since entering their room, only sitting at the table and looking for a book to read. No matter how Zhang Ruan thought about it, she felt he had to be angry. Honestly, even on a normal day his expression remained the same, whether Xiao Xiao was angry or not. However, at this moment, although it was not obvious, she could sense that he was displeased. She considered in the end this situation was her fault. Anyone would be unhappy if his own wife kept him in the dark about something like this. She had always been frank and direct about situations such as these. Once she knew she was in the wrong, she would admit it. However, Xiao Xiao did not talk to her at all, so Zhang Ruan was in a predicament. She felt that Xiao Xiao was very much like Xian Pei in her previous life, who was prone to throwing tantrums. However, when Xian Pei got angry, all she had to do was to make him some sweet pastries or praise him as being clever and cute, and that would be it. For her to tell Xiao Xiao that he was her good little boy? Zhang Ruan shuddered. After a long time she finally stood up and walked to Xiao Xiao's side. Xiao Xiao refused to look at her, his gaze firmly fixed on his book. Zhang Ruan pulled over a chair to sit next to him and said softly, Xiao Xiao, how did you know that I had gone to the Jiangfu? Jean Eyre found out, Xiao Xiao replied coolly, still not turning his gaze to Zhang Ruan. Zhang Ruan nodded. Today's incident is my fault. I should not have kept it from you. She admitted her error quickly, without any hesitation. She had always been direct with the people she was familiar with, and would not hide anything. Xiao Xiao kept looking down. You were not at fault. Are you angry? Zhang Ruan asked. No. He was clearly angry. Xiao Xiao was being so difficult. Zhang Ruan drew her chair closer to the table and placed one hand on it while supporting her cheek with the other hand, thus half leaning on the table as she unblinkingly observed Xiao Xiao. The young man's expression was indifferent, as if he was completely unbothered by external factors. His long eyelashes sketched a graceful arc, and his eyes were as deep as a boundless ocean of stars. Hopping around in agitation, he said, That's the medicine I asked Divine Physician Xia to prescribe for young master. I was going to give it to him tonight. I never expected that young foreign would get hurt. AI, it's not the right time to take that medicine now. AI, it won't succeed. I can't tell young master. What do I do? I'm going to go and hide Jin San Lu Zhu. If young master asks, tell him I have caught a cold. Don't you dare let your tongue slip. Steward Lin broke into a cold sweat. Who could have imagined this? Earlier, he had thought that Xiao Xiao was unable to consummate his marriage because his body was unable to, and the medicine he had specially asked Divine Physician Xia to prescribe had been given to Zhang Ruan. He did not know what would happen if a woman took it. It was all a big mess, but upon second thought, why did he still have a sense of anticipation? Chapter 200. Chapter 200. Realizing Lao Lin's dream. After Zhang Ruan finished the medicine, she wanted to lie down on the couch to rest, but instead found herself feeling restless and unable to sleep for some inexplicable reason. It was a cold winter's day, but she did not feel cold at all. Instead, a thin sheen of sweat appeared on her forehead. She initially thought that this was due to the medicine, and ignored it by simply turning over and pushing off the blanket. Yet, after a while, unexpectedly she grew increasingly hotter. Not only that, a strange, unfamiliar emotion started to surge within her. She vaguely guessed what it might be, but at the same time thought it was too incredible to be true. She wanted to sit up, but one move was all it took for her to realize that her body was incredibly weak. Xiao Xiao. Jiang Ruan could not stop herself from calling out. The voice that emerged from her mouth startled even Jiang Ruan herself. It was sweet and charming, gentle and tender. Hearing this, Xiao Xiao looked up, and was slightly taken aback by Jiang Ruan's appearance. He put down his book and walked over to sit by the bed. Although his face remained cold, he was unable to mask his deep concern as he asked, "What is it?" He observed that Jiang Ruan's face was exceedingly red. Frowning, he reached out to touch her forehead. When Xiao Xiao's icy cold, long and elegant hand touched Jiang Ruan's forehead, she could not help but sigh with contentment. However, this feeling startled her, and she felt too embarrassed to look at him, but in the end, her body was more honest than her rational sense. Right now, her entire body was burning up, and she was really reluctant to give up Xiao Xiao's ice-cold body. Thus, she subconsciously moved to snuggle next to him. "You." Xiao Xiao abruptly withdrew his hand, and felt for her pulse at her wrist. Jiang Ruan's body trembled and Xiao Xiao's movements halted for an imperceptible second, as if he had suddenly realized something, and his pitch-black eyes stared at Jiang Ruan. Seeing his expression, Jiang Ruan more or less knew what had happened. For a moment she felt both flustered and distressed, but was unable to restrain her urge to rub against Xiao Xiao's body, and could only grit her teeth to try and control the fire within her. Xiao Xiao retracted his hand and said in a firm, cold voice, "I'll go and call Xia Qing to come." At the moment, anger was faintly discernible in his voice. Even if it was a prank, no matter who was responsible for the current situation, to treat Jiang Ruan's body so carelessly was simply too much. "Xiao Xiao." Jiang Ruan immediately grabbed him. She did not actually use much force, as her entire being was focused on fighting the flames which were rising within her. She really had no excess energy to spare. Xiao Xiao halted momentarily, turned and said, "It's all right. It's just that the prescription is wrong." He was probably still trying to console her. Jiang Ruan half opened her eyes in a daze. At this point, she seemed to be split into two people. One was throbbing from head to toe with unfamiliar feelings and was not in control of herself. The other was observing everything that was happening with crystal-clear clarity. The young man in front of her was always clad in black, and this added an aura of icy strictness to his usual cold and detached temperament, as if he had renounced all manner of desires. It was indeed hard to imagine that there was such a coldly indifferent person in this world. And yet, at this moment, his handsome face, his tightly pursed thin lips, his minutely frowning brows, all combined to make him look extremely delectable. Delectable? Jiang Ruan gripped the corner of his clothes and eked out with difficulty, "Don't go. There's no need to be anxious." Xiao Xiao seemed unable to understand her meaning. Seeing that she was persistent and fearing that she would fall down, he sat down on the bed and said softly, "I will be back very soon." Jiang Ruan felt somewhat enraged. She had already said everything clearly, but Xiao Xiao was still so stupid. Right now, her entire body was as hot as a branding iron, and now that she was so close to Xiao Xiao in his cold body, and she smelled his raw male scent, she was almost unable to control the urge to plaster herself against him. Thereupon Jiang Ruan acted. She wound her arms around Xiao Xiao's neck, and began rubbing against him with some impatience. A faint flush immediately appeared on Xiao Xiao's pale, handsome countenance. He considered pushing her away, but simply said, "Listen to me and let me go." But in the very next moment, he felt her lean heavily against him. Then, taken off guard, he found himself being pushed flat on the bed, and shortly thereafter, a soft body threw itself on top of him. Jiang Ruan struggled to prop herself up and stared fiercely at him. Her face was already rosy as a result of the medicine, charm was simply oozing from her eyes, and her voice had been as soft as silk. But in the next moment, and with ample vigor, she practically yelled, "I told you not to go." However, no matter how loud her voice was, What Xiao Xiao heard was the voice of a spoilt child throwing a tantrum. Xiao Xiao quietly gazed at Zhang Ruan, who was lying on his body, and coolly asked, "Do you know what you're doing?" Zhang Ruan's eyes were as fierce as a hungry wolf's, yet she had a face so beautiful and alluring that it could stop the earth from turning on its axis, and her eyes were as limpid and lustrous as those of a little fox in the forest. Only saints could stop themselves from being moved by her. Xiao Xiao's body was truly icy cold, and draping herself over him was like lying on a block of ice. Zhang Ruan sighed in satisfaction. Of course she knew what signal she was sending out with her present actions. After the poison had been removed, her relationship with Xiao Xiao had begun to change into something different. She had always taken a long time to warm up to someone, and if things were left to her natural disposition, who knew how long a wait it would be? She and Xiao Xiao were husband and wife, and more importantly, she was not against having an intimate relationship with him. Xiao Xiao was a man of honor through and through. Unless he had her consent, he would never take the initiative to suggest they sleep together. Moreover, with her temperament, she would probably also never speak of it. Hence, why not make use of this opportunity, which almost seemed as if it was presenting itself as a way out of an embarrassing situation. Therefore, if she missed this moment, she did not know if she would again have the courage to be so proactive in making her attitude clear to Xiao Xiao. With such a rare chance, her mind was absolutely clear, but when she looked into Xiao Xiao's calm, pitch-black eyes, for a split second, she felt as though she was being sucked into them. Zhang Ruan's mind and heart were all in chaos. But finally, she smiled and answered, doing this. At the same time, she raised her hand and pulled off Xiao Xiao's waist sash with all her strength. Xiao Xiao froze, and a hint of a blush on his face became more obvious. Now, for whatever reason, his previously icy cold body under hers was no longer so cold. Zhang Ruan sat up on him and looked down on him from her commanding position to say, "You and I are husband and wife. I'm doing what a wife ought to do." Xiao Xiao's long eyelashes fluttered slightly. His eyes were bright and penetrating, but his tone was soft as he said, "Ruan, you won't regret this." Zhang Ruan said nothing. Very slowly, she lowered her body and gathered her courage to nibble at his neck. She had always been able to exercise control, and in truth this medicine was not as strong as expected. At the very least, it was not as strong as the medicine which had previously been given to her. She was simply making use of this convenient opportunity and half pretending to be under the influence. It was a good thing that her face was already red, so no one would notice her unusual state of mind. Xiao Xiao narrowed his eyes. His entire body was coiled as tightly as a spring, but Zhang Ruan was arching around his neck like a cat. Although Zhang Ruan had no experience in her previous life, she had gained instruction from a pamphlet she had read before entering the palace. So she kissed him at random, and was thinking about where she should place her hand when, to her surprise, it was encased in an icy grip. Zhang Ruan pulled herself up slightly, a little puzzled. Zhang Ruan felt her face heat up under Xiao Xiao's gaze, but she did not want him to perceive her lack of self-confidence. She wanted to extinguish the lamp, but when she made the slightest movement, Xiao Xiao once again asserted dominance with his body, and his expression was not at all like its usual cold detachment. In her previous and present lives, although she had experienced all kinds of turmoil, this was the first time she was experiencing the relationship between a man and a woman. It was both strange and nerve-wracking, and her initial boldly provocative manner had entirely dissipated. However, once she had shot the arrow, there was no turning back. Right now, it was naturally impossible to allow Xiao Xiao to put a stop to what was happening. They couldn't stop now. Why was Xiao Xiao being so annoying as he lay on top of her? Zhang Ruan gritted her teeth and said, "You, hurry up." Xiao Xiao was again slightly taken aback. The lamp was still lit at this time, and Xiao Xiao's face was truly that of a handsome devil who would bring disaster to the country and mislead many. Moreover, his deep eyes were glittering like starlight. He said softly, "Ruan." Zhang Ruan once again fiercely pinched his slender waist, and glared at him somewhat resentfully as she said, I'm all right, you hurry up." Xiao Xiao smiled faintly and coolly stated, "Ruan, it's too late for you to regret it now. It was like a field of red plum flowers noiselessly blossoming on a winter's day, brightly colored and dazzling to the eye. Whether in heaven or on earth, only the beauty of these plum blossoms could captivate the souls of those who appreciated them. The flowers' petals were trembling minutely and timidly, and on this frigid winter day, they blossomed with a different kind of beauty. The snowflakes were cold and sparkling. The red blossoms were charming and full of vitality. This beautiful scene was truly that of a match made in heaven, and anyone glancing upon it would lose their minds. However, they only bloomed silently at night, so no one else saw this intimate demonstration of beauty. The dark night's soft and gentle noises could faintly be heard far away. Even though it was a chilly winter night, the room was lit with a passion that burned like fire. The once-in-a-lifetime moment of experiencing the most intimate form of human communion was realized on this night. It was as if all the annoyance caused by misunderstanding vanished like smoke in thin air, and the two of them became one body with their most authentic and candid selves. The darkness and grief of her previous life, the endless pain hidden in the depths of her heart, the secrets which could not be exposed to others, all of these seemed to change in the space of this one night. In this lifetime, one person would stand with her side by side from now onwards, and they would share both weal and woe as husband and wife. This was a strange and unfamiliar situation, but also one which gave rise to anticipation. Xiao Xiao moved off Jiang Ruan's body. He was perspiring heavily after an intense spring night. Jiang Ruan lay on the sleeping couch. As she recalled how enthusiastic she had been in taking the initiative, she wanted to die in her sleep as she lay among the bedclothes. She feared that, in future, Xiao Xiao would laugh whenever he thought about how active she had been during their first time. Chun Xiao. The reference is to a poem by a great Song Dynasty writer, Su Shi. The poem opens by describing the beauty of a quiet spring night, telling people to cherish the time. Lit. A moment in a springtime night is worth 1,000 gold pieces. As time passed, somehow, this phrase became a word of advice to newlywed couples, to cherish the short, and therefore precious time of the wedding night. Xiao Xiao stroked her long hair and said gently, "I'll ask someone to draw water for you." "No need," Jiang Ruan hurriedly called out. When she met Xiao Xiao's gaze, she felt somewhat embarrassed. If she called for water now, it would be as good as publicly announcing to the entire Wangfu what they had finally gotten up to that night. She was still not used to showing herself to others in such a casual manner, especially for something as private as this. However, on looking at her sticky state, not calling for water simply would not do, and she felt herself in something of a dilemma. Xiao Xiao observed her thoughtfully, then nodded and said, "I'll go and draw the water." Is your body still in pain?" He had picked up on Jiang Ruan's apprehensions at a glance, and had spoken with extreme consideration. However, admitting the pain would instantly cause flashbacks of their intense activities just prior. "There's no pain," Jiang Ruan replied quickly. No sooner had she spoken when she felt the soreness of her lower body, and could not help but grumble inwardly. Xiao Xiao normally looked so cold and indifferent, but he became a different person in bed. Truly, because of his martial arts background, his physical strength was exceptional. And although she could bear it, she also felt a little overwhelmed. It was like the man had wicked intentions and wanted to make her cry out. In this lifetime she had never felt as humiliated as now. Xiao Xiao was really black-hearted. How could she never have seen this before? Xiao Xiao could not stop the corners of his mouth from twitching. He said slowly, "All right, I'll go and prepare some medicine." He said prepare medicine with great significance, as if there was some exceedingly profound meaning, but his face was a mask of calm. Jiang Ruan choked momentarily. That bowl of medicine, success and failure were both related to it. She had originally intended to borrow the medicine's effects to accomplish her goal tonight, which was in actuality no big deal. However, who would have expected that after the medicine's effects had faded, she would still be so out of control? Thinking about it now made her blush with shame. All the genie guards in the Wangfu had such good hearing, and it was possible that they had heard every single movement in the room. The second she thought this, Jiang Ruan's expression turned indignant. "You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.